Manager, our Technical Officer, and Lynn Davey, our Democratic and Governance Officer, who has oversight of this process. The session is not being held in public, but a recording will be made available on the Council's website for viewing by the public. The objectives from the inquiry terms of reference are as follows. 1, to review the current state of the economy in rural and coastal areas in Cornwall and consider future economic forecasts if current trends continue. For example, sector mix, economic performance, employment, salary levels, population levels, and so on. And also to consider the necessary and desirable interactions between the rural economy and local towns in Cornwall. Number 2, to consider what support is already available and planned for rural and coastal areas in Cornwall, and to investigate alternative methods of stimulating the economy of rural and coastal areas, for example, by taking evidence from other parts of the UK and possibly Europe. And then number 3, to consider the potential impact of different intervention strategies and to make recommendations on how the Council can contribute and support the development of the economy in rural and coastal areas in Cornwall. The process consists of a number of recorded evidence gathering sessions supported by organisational sessions and initial briefing information. This is I think it's our 4th, Lynn will tell me if I'm wrong, recorded evidence gathering session where we are gathering evidence from witnesses who have particular experience and knowledge to help us. We value the input of all witnesses who give up their valuable time to take part in our process and thank them for their input. With regard to the questioning of our witnesses, the processes for each will be the same. Each witness will be asked to briefly introduce themselves, allow approximately 10 to 15 minutes for that expert witness to present their views and position on rural and coastal vitality in Cornwall, and to outline 3 or 4 recommendations they feel would help stimulate rural and coastal areas. Only inquiry panel members may ask witnesses questions. Other members are very welcome to attend and observe proceedings, and I'll give them the opportunity to comment at the end of each witness session. Although if time becomes limited, this may need to be at the end of the evidence gathering session as a whole. Due to limited time, I will try to ensure that questions and answers are kept as succinct as possible, particularly as there could be supplementary questions based on responses to other questions. Further written clarification may be sought if necessary. All questions and responses are to come through me as chair. An X in the chat box works very well and is very helpful. Once witnesses have finished giving evidence, they are more than welcome to stay for the remainder of the meeting as an observer. And the evidence from the sessions will be used to support findings and recommendations to the panel. Thank you very much, guys. That's my standard preamble that I have to read out at the beginning. Malcolm, I'm very grateful for you coming along and joining us this afternoon. We've had evidence from a variety of sources so far, everything from independent entrepreneurs running wind farms through to the fishing and maritime people, along to with quite a lot of farming stuff as well. And we're obviously particularly interested in this inquiry in looking at what stokes provides the engine room outside of towns in the rural and village hinterland, obviously coastal as well, of Cornwall. And I'm very glad to be able to welcome you as our expert witness, who's representing the tourism industry in Cornwall, which probably is one of the biggest wealth generators that Cornwall has. So Malcolm, with that, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, how many of you actually watched BBC Two last night at 8:10 with Simon Reeve?
It's recorded.
It's well worth it. I think it's one of the best programmes I've seen for a long time, and probably threw up some of the challenges and opportunities. So if you haven't, look forward to watching it. And I'll be fascinated to see next week. I thought it was a very good programme. I'm going to kick off with just giving boring stats, but also adding a narrative to those stats, because I think you're right. I mean, it's first of all, tourism isn't new to Cornwall. It's been around, many years. Over 100 and probably 150 plus years. In fact, I was looking at Port Scatho on the Roseland and wondering where all those big houses were and were those shipping houses, and they're all built in the 1860s for tourists. So we've been through a cycle. And in tourism in Cornwall, we probably went through a cycle where we were a very aspirational destination up until the Second World War. Chamomile Lawns, somebody's watched it. It was a very big place to go. In the 1960s onwards, and particularly growing into the 70s, I grew up in the 70s, it was a mass tourism destination. And probably we have the same number of visitors that we get now. I have checked it, it's roughly the same, but they were actually compacted into half the number of weeks. So I can remember the chaos in the 70s. 80s and 90s was downhill all the way as overseas tourism took off. And in 1995, Cornwall was a tourism development action zone area by the national government, and the National Tourist Board, which was in a par, put into the same basket as Skegness, Blackpool, and the one in Yorkshire that's gone past my mind at the moment, plus a few others. What we have seen in the last 25 years is actually moving from the sin bin, if you get me, in the relegation zone to being one of the premier destinations. And that's an awful lot of effort done in by people moving into the Cornwall, but often some of the families, the grandchildren of people moving things on. So for an example I'll give you is Watergate Bay, 2001, I remember it well, foot and mouth. I was sitting there with the parents of the current operators, and their employment during the winter was around 20 people. Today, Watergate Bay Complex is over 200 and operates. So, you know, there are some challenges I'll come back onto later on with my recommendations. So first of all, give you an idea. You probably know these figures, 5 million visitors, about £2 billion worth of tourist spend. And I'll come on to employment later on. So I'll grab that one now. Cornwall has the highest number of staying nights. It's actually twice as dependent on tourism as Devon is. Devon actually has more visitors. Cornwall has slightly more staying power in terms of number of nights, about 23 million nights. And to give you an idea, that means at the peak of the summer, that was one that frustrates me when I hear people say there's millions of people here at any one time. But that's about a growth of about 180 to maybe on a peak sunny day, 200,000 bodies extra in the county, which is still a massive jump from 530,000. But when some people say there's a million people here, that's not physically possible. Again, moving on to some figures, and this is the big challenge, I think, for this, is obviously tourism, like in many other areas, does tend to actually go near where the assets are. And in Cornwall, obviously, that is the coast. And then there's the rural coastal, and then there's rural. And it has, you know, in my lifetime, all the cottages I remember being derelict on estates and farms, being shoozied up and either sold or become holiday properties. But obviously there is a big difference between the number of visitors here at different times of the year, different nights, but it has actually moved up. We are a premier destination. We've won top UK holiday destination for 10 out of the last 11 years. I don't know what went wrong when we beat to Northumberland, but I think there's a lot of Yorkshire votes and Northern votes. And that gives us a premium price. If anybody ever does watch, for amusement, probably me, 4 in a bed or 3 in a bed, it's very rare that anything in Cornwall ever wins because their prices are normally higher. And we estimate between 10 and 20% higher rate for equivalent properties to other places. But we shouldn't be complacent. Over the last few years, we've had Suffolk, Norfolk, Yorkshire, all down here looking at the product, looking at the standard of the product. So there are plenty of competitions. We've even had Iceland over here, and they copied something on their Black Beach, and Denmark and lots of places. And much to my delight, Brittany and Finisterre over to see why we're doing better than they are. And always managing to make them taste the Camel Valley champagne and then liking it and occasionally beating their own. So it's always a bit of relatively fun pleasure. Coming back to employment, and I think this is the issue to give you an idea. Employment overall is about 52,000 jobs dependent on that visitor turnover, 39 full-time equivalents. There's 52,000 people. In a survey done a good few years ago now, but I doubt if it's changed, about 1 in 3 households has 1 or more people that get part of their income from tourism. And that is a lot bigger around the coast and in rural areas. But to give you an idea, breaking down that 39,500 full-time equivalents, which is, that would be about 24,000, around a bit, in direct in employment, 9,000 indirect, and that's mainly in retail and the food and drink and supply sector, and then another 6,000 induced, which tends to be in the construction industry, banking, marketing consultants, and all the elements that support such a big sector. So, as you can see, it's around 55–60% of jobs are direct and 40% of jobs are indirect. And I think that's, if you look at the number of marketing agencies, professional agencies, architects, accountants, our own accountant, Francis Clark, would be in trouble if it wasn't for tourism. I'll give you an idea of percentage of employment, and I can submit these figures if people want them, because it comes straight off the 2019, which is the only stats we've got, formal stats, is 20% of employment in that full direct, induced and indirect. And again, that's twice as high as Devon as a percentage, and a lot higher if you go to other areas. So I think it just shows the scale of it. To give you an idea of numbers, shopping for the retail sector, it's worth 375 million. Food and drink is approaching 550 million, and then entertainment and attractions around 200 million. So there's big chunks of the money. It's not just about, it's one of my passions, it's not just going to hoteliers and holiday park owners. It's the other part of it, and this is when I'll come on to my last conclusions, which I think is those. We did some modelling a year ago, slightly would have changed, but probably not overall, of where we'd be in 10 years' time, looking at the growth in leisure visits generally of the British population and overseas. So we can probably discount overseas a bit, but they'd replaced more by British. And if we had a 1% growth per annum, just 1%, we'd be talking about an extra 800,000 people coming in 10 years' time, an extra 2 million bed nights, an extra 2.5 million day visitors, and that's larger because of a growth in the population of Cornwall, and probably around 6,000 to 8,000 additional jobs. That's direct, induced and indirect, and an additional 700+ million pounds into the economy. So there is growth potential there. My conclusion, though, going forward is, as we've seen this summer, and it was highlighted in our thought piece we did in January, that because of the growth in the population and the increased popularity, we've got a real challenge about the peak weeks. The term over-tourism is often used, mainly more about Venice and other places. We've seen it a couple of years ago on a very good weather, and I think we've seen it this year. So the challenge is there's a lot of growth opportunity, but there's also lots of threats in terms of the quality of the product, because the strategy for the last 10 years has been solely about value, not volume. So getting a better price, be that a campsite, a holiday park, a hotel, or self-catering, and that is to do with raising the quality. Higher the quality, the better the price. Same for agriculture, same for fishing, same for tourism. So I think we've got one major threat and one major challenge going forward, as well as opportunities and important strides to make on sustainability, low carbon and inclusive tourism. And that is, how do we manage the peak, and how do we still get better jobs, and nicely said yesterday, some careers, or I would say stable jobs, because tourism, like retail, like other sectors, is a big generator of jobs as well as careers, but people want stability in those jobs. And that is obviously to tackle seasonality. And I'll come on to the second lever in a minute. Now, seasonality has always been a problem for obvious reasons. It's a lot nicer on the beach in July and August than it is today. But what we have seen and what we're projecting forward is a massive growth in the senior market, people even older than me. A lot of interest now would have been actually accelerated in staying fit and staying healthy, and multiple holiday taking. So the baby boomer generation is the most wealthiest generation this country will ever see. And that a 70-year-old now isn't behaving like a 70-year-old was 10 years ago. And they won't be behaving like that now. So there's a big growth market in the senior market about health, staying fit, well-being, pursuing their passions and interests. And that's one big market for the UK, probably accelerated now due to COVID and travel. How long that lasts, we don't know, but I think many people might not be going back to the same amount of travel. And the second market is a wonderful new marketing term called the workation. Is that many people now self-employed, flexibly working, digitally working, and digital nomads can combine work with a vacation. So the number of people who can say, yeah, I'll go down and have a break in the winter and blast away and get the fresh air, and I'll do work in the morning and go for a blast and a relaxation. And that's very much some of the market that even is appearing now in places like Watergate Bay, where in November, up until a week ago, they were projecting 88% occupancy rate for November. So if you get the spas, the gyms, the facilities, you can achieve high rates. So that's one thing about tackling seasonality, and we'll probably talk about that in a minute. I'm winding up soon, I promise you. So my first recommendation is that we have a real 5-year concerted effort on actually shifting the mindset of a target market so there's nothing better than a break in Cornwall in the winter. The second one is on the supply side, is all that money we've got that is spent on retail, food and drink, we do need to adopt more of the circular economy principles and capture that a lot more locally. And that is assisted by having lots of small independent businesses rather than chains, but obviously making what the turnover is sweat more. And that is about looking at helping suppliers to supply the industry, bringing together virtual consortia in terms of supplying it and tackling it that way. Likewise, there's leakage in the digital economy with things called brand jacking and the online travel agencies like Bookings, taking up to £60 million out of Cornwall. So we've really got to look at how we make that money that is there stick as much as possible. The third recommendation, and this is maybe more provocative in some quarters and it's not meant to be, is that we do have to certainly register all accommodation, if not consider in some places, if not completely, licensing accommodation to control the supply. If I give you an example, I'm not picking on Airbnb because bookings.com do it and Home and Away do it, and lots of others, is 4 years ago, there were 3 or 4 properties on Airbnb, it's the only one we've got stats for, in the St Agnes Porthtowan area. Last year, I haven't got the stats this year, there were over 400 properties, and most of those only operate in August. So we have a real issue that with the wonderful platforms, that's what I said, it's not a knock of Airbnb. There's 2 things about it. You can suddenly get a surge of supply in July and August when we struggle to cope. And that can reduce the price per week. So we go back down from value, not volume, back more to volume. And the second one is the lack of a level playing field for the commercial sector. So if somebody who runs self-catering, a couple of self-catering units, has to abide by all the rules, pay the tax under the furnished holiday lettings, somebody else can come in and pay VAT, and somebody else can come in with about a 30% margin and operate for 4 or 5 weeks. So there's got to be a balance here. That's a debate for Cornwall. And last but not least, because I've prattled on too long, is it's a crying shame to me that in Cornwall, maybe based at the university, we shouldn't have, we're a leading destination, internationally recognised. Why haven't we got an education and then a research and development centre for rural, coastal, sustainable and regenerative tourism? You know, we used to have Campbell School of Mines because we're a mining area. We have no academic research capacity within Cornwall for the tourism and hospitality sector. And I think that's one that could not only provide great jobs, but also act as a real power to keep the industry competitive. So I've probably gone on far too long because it's 12 minutes on my stopwatch. And I reckon I was prattling for about 4 or 5 minutes before then. So I will shut up at this point.
Okay, Malcolm, thank you. No need to shut up because we actually started a little bit early, to be fair. And I see that Linda Taylor has joined us. So, Linda, I hope you didn't miss anything that you particularly wanted to hear Malcolm saying. Very, very interesting. All of that stuff, Malcolm, that you're saying about the values and the amounts of money that are changing hands, the amount of visitors that are here. A few things occur to me. I think creating reasons for people to visit Cornwall all year round is very important. And of course, when you talk about natural capital of beaches and the seaside, that's an easy one. We don't have to do too much about that because it's there anyway. All we have to do is to manage it properly, which is great. But in terms of the off season, what have we got to offer tourists then and people that visit Cornwall? Okay, we've got lots of outside space, which is absolutely beautiful. But I do wonder whether or not we need to be thinking a little bit more about undercover attractions and perhaps some more consideration and development towards some of the outside stuff. And I'll give you an example here of something that really floated my boat a few years ago. I used to be really keen on mountain biking until I fell off too many times and thought I'd better stop, otherwise I just get broken ribs all the time and it really hurts. But I used to go up to South Wales, and they have got a series of mountain bike tracks in the mountains there, which are free to access. And it's a magnificent attraction for people going into those fairly remote areas and using the local economy, because they've got these attractions, which, and to be honest, mountain biking is probably better in the middle of December or January than it is in the middle of summer in some ways. And I'd often wondered what we could do in Cornwall that not exactly the same, but could we offer something similar but different, that was a reason or something to hang our hat on for people to come? I don't know if that's anything that's been any on your radar, or something you've given any thought. But anyway, I don't particularly want you to respond to that yet. What I want to do is to bring my panel in, if that's okay, and they can have a chat with you. So let's go Jim McKenna first, please.
Peter, thank you. Malcolm, good afternoon. Just one particular question, really, in relation to what you said around Airbnbs, because that is something which, as you say, has escalated wildly in terms of numbers. And I just wondered what realistically were the chances of actually regulating that sort of business, because pretty much half the people I know either stay at or have got Airbnbs. And it's taking money out of the registered providers, and as you say, it's potentially driving costs down because they don't have the same expenses. And it's something I'd be interested in. Well, I think the council will be interested in, actually, because effectively those things are businesses, and so there could be a business rate side of things. It's just really some sort of regulation, not saying don't do it, but actually do it in a way which is reasonable and fair.
Airbnb's position, because we have had discussions and as part of a consortium that's actually contracted with the QC to challenge some of the regulations in this country, is Airbnb's position is if the country brings in, or a region brings in regulations, they'll abide by them, but they don't believe in doing it unless they have to, which is fair enough, understandable. So our belief is the first step would be a registration scheme, so that anybody providing accommodation would have to register with the local authority. And that would have to be at a charge of maybe between £50 and £200-300, depending on the size of the business, because it's got to be funded from the industry, and the industry by and large don't object to that. And that would then trigger people like ourselves being able to contact them, but more importantly, fire and rescue and public protection, to remind them of their rights, because there's a misconception that if you take somebody in only in your house, or you go and leave your house and let somebody else in, that somehow you're not subject to the same laws. As soon as you take money for providing accommodation and or food, you are subject to all the same regulations as the Watergate Bay Hotel. So I think the first thing that would happen is it would probably make people take a second step and a breather, because it's very easy to chuck the property on Airbnb and think that it's all modern, it doesn't really matter. So I think, and we've talked to public protection, and Cornwall's public protection services, to my mind, exemplar.
Yes,
they would be more than happy to advise people and guide them and all sorts of things. So I think the first one is registration, because that just creates a bit of a on somebody who then says, hang on a minute, I've got to register, I better check what my is. I think later on, and I wouldn't dismiss it, is in certain areas where unfortunately properties can be bought for second homes, which is fair enough, but equally lots of these are more residential ones, not the prime ones, and are then used for a bit of Airbnb, is you might even have to consider licensing because of the impact on the local housing stock. The registration is more about, and compliance with the rules is more about commercial. But if we knew every property that was being used for self-catering or service in the county, we'd have a better grip of what we need.
Okay. And do you think the local authority, I mean, I would imagine there would be a good amount of support from within the membership. Is this something you've spoken to the local authority about before?
It is. It's more been talked in the last year under the LEP economy group, and also about engaging them in the circular economy. And I think it's something that I would say, given Cornwall's challenges on affordability and its importance on tourism, it's something that Cornwall could pilot on behalf of the rest of the country.
Okay, because I'm conscious that they do obviously add to the economy, but it's possibly the negative impact on others, and whether or not that actually is kept in Cornwall. So I'd certainly be in favour of looking at it without wanting to demonise that particular area. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Jane Pascoe, would you like to have a chat with Malcolm?
Fine, yes. Hello, Malcolm. I'm conscious we often have conversations in our South East Cornwall economy group, don't we, about tourism. And I was really interested in the part when you were talking about seasonality. I mean, we have our own natural beauty in Cornwall, as Peter has referred to, and we also have a very mild climate. And I think that one thing that this pandemic has done is make people very, very aware of exercise, activity, keeping fit, and actually including it in their leisure time, as opposed to a chore where they have to go to the gym. And we've had this sort of conversation before. I'm never quite sure we quite promote or market Cornwall enough in the way that they can surf, sail, pony ride, bicycle, walk. It's even more extreme sports too. I mean, rock climbing. There's so much they could do all year round here that it just hasn't got to be summer bucket and spade or sunbathing holidays. There really is so much to do, and tie in with that the wonderful produce we have here that I don't think we've got a wonderful platform here to showcase all this wonderful produce. We've got 11 cheeses in this county, some of them award-winning, and I just don't know if the rest of the country or even the rest of the world know about it enough. And then the other thing, as you know, I'm going to say is levelling up, that the whole of Cornwall is promoted in that way, because often our hidden corner in the southeast, it really, really is a forgotten corner, but it has so many of these activities that people could enjoy. You know, not just gently walking or cycling, but I mean these canoeing and sailing and perhaps having courses. I mean, I've always said Tor Point would make a fantastic sailing school like Salcombe used to be. It's huge. It's got the facilities. It's got St John's Lake. It's got the Sound. And I just think there's so many opportunities there that we're not actually really driving into. And I wonder what you feel about that.
I think it is. I mean, we were going to start a online campaign last week of 50 things you can do in the winter every day in Cornwall. And I think you're quite right. There's a new thing now called wind wings, which is like kite surfing, but you hold on to it. And as you say, I think there is cycling, there's wild swimming, the blue and green gym are there. I think there are some lessons to be learned. One thing I would recommend is looking at the Wild Atlantic Way and Scotland 500, Romantic 500. They've been incredibly successful schemes. I'm afraid they do come with a big marketing budget, but the Wild Atlantic Way has opened up the West Coast and a lot of that out of season, and the same for the Scotland 500. So I would love to be in a position where, in a way, most of our marketing, well, actually all of any supported marketing should be not just shoulder season, but deep out of season. Because if you do the shoulders, they're actually slowly picking up. You really need to target. And things like wildlife activities, all sorts of things we could build around that. But that would take, I'm afraid it'd probably take two to 5 years of a significant, but not massively expensive campaign to reposition Cornwall as two different markets. We don't have to worry about promoting, tactically we can do it. We don't have to bother promoting the destination for the summer. I mean, even last night's TV programme did that. Then you've got to get a drone up showing the coast. What we've got to do is more things of what people are doing at other times.
Yes, I agree. And one thing, if I may, Chair, I did also forget to mention, and I happen to know people who will go all over the country to do park runs.
Yeah.
At different weekends, and we have some magnificent parks here, don't we? That I know they do one at Lanhydrock, but we have some real opportunities for that, because I think when they come down for a weekend like that, they re-find Cornwall and enjoy it, and then want to come back for longer, don't they, or more often?
I think, yeah, and I think the thing if I was given, and I'm not saying or anybody was given the budget, you would then really use some of the key influences in the markets we're talking about, which is your Julie Bradburys and some other people on the cycling side, and you pick those people that really hit the 50 plus market. Most of the 50 plus market are not constrained by school holidays. No. A lot of the 60 place market have a lot of freedom of when they can take. And if you hire a cottage or go to a B&B or a hotel room in November, January, February, March, it's incredibly good value, because the businesses can operate at marginal rate. So that's what we've got to get across, is not only what you can do here, but what good value it is in the winter, because you'll get a room at the Bordergate Bay for less than 100 quid, where it'd be £300-400. You'll get a cottage for probably the equivalent of £20 to £30 per night for people with a group. And your thing about learning, it's funny, I'm writing a thing to go out, because we're finishing off an idea of a draft strategy, and learning is very there. I mean, my sister spent, I know she only comes from Truro, she only went as far as Mevagizzy, but she spent last week, up until Thursday anyway, with 8 of her friends in a self-catering complex learning more about quilting. And that cottage deals with quilts one week, photographers another week. He's really tapped into that learning market, and Nordic walking people. And he has a set, goes out to those markets in the very low weeks. And that's what we could target up country. So special interest things, going back to the chairman and cycling, you could do a whole range of groups now that are actually wanting to stay active mentally, but also physically. I mean, personally, I'm 65 now. What COVID has proved to me is you've got to stay pretty bloody fit if you want to make it to 80.
Yes, me too.
And that's the new mindset now in lots of people. We might get on top of COVID in the next few weeks or months or years, but it's now on the mindset that could come back. So if you've now, in that sort of nice position, that all you've got to worry about is how long you're going to carry on going, then all the blue gyms, the green gyms, the mental activity all become very marketable. And why do you want to bother travelling for that when you just do it in Cornwall? So I think 10 years ago, I would be a lot more pessimistic about the ability to tackle seasonality. But because of the demographics and other changes, I don't think it's difficult anymore. But we've got to reposition ourselves where people think Cornwall is wonderful blue seas like last night and sunny beaches.
Yes, no, I agree entirely, and I think you're right. I think people have rediscovered the great outdoors. The people in the cities have suddenly realised how beneficial it can be. So rather than get on an airplane and go and sit on a beach and drink themselves silly, hopefully they'll come and enjoy Cornwall and some healthy pursuits. But yes, thank you. I look forward to catching up with you in South East Cornwall again with our scheme up there.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. Not that there's anything wrong with getting on an aeroplane and sitting on a hot beach and drinking yourself silly, which I've done many times in my life.
No, I
do again one day, but never mind.
Do it right now.
Malcolm, I'm really interested in some of the stuff that you're saying, because we've got a guy up in Bude who's really pushing some ideas on tourism and lengthening the hospitality season. He believes that the future is in this sort of special interest instructional break that people can take. And just as a complete side issue, my wife owns a tiny little shop, and she's a very keen knitter. So it's a knitting and craft shop. And she discovered the whole principle of knitting holidays. And there is a massive premium. People are prepared to pay huge bucks to go on instructional holidays where people who are celebrities in those sort of very tight knitted worlds are known and will come and attend those things. So I think that does have some sort of future, really worth looking at for us. So Mike McLennan, your turn to have a chat. Linda Taylor, I will come to you after Mike.
Good afternoon, Malcolm.
Good afternoon.
must have pressed the wrong button there. I'm back. I spent most of my career in the media with regards to Salesforces, publishers, etc., and advertising people. I think it's nothing new that the marketplace has changed. It's been like it for years. That how you target your advertising and marketing to different seasons of the year. Because at one time we used to send our London sales forces down to Devon and Cornwall for July, August, and a bit of September. That all stopped because the sales weren't there for. And these are good magazines. They were good magazines, but the sales were falling away. We used to, as a sales company, we wanted to rain the first day they arrived in Cornwall, so they went into WH Smith and wherever and bought magazines. Very cruel, wasn't I? But that's how we worked. The thing I find is, and I'm doing this as an outsider because I'm a Londoner by trade, and I've been here 13 years. I must say I love it, Cornwall, but I think I moved down at the right time in my life. I don't know about how we advertise Cornwall. I agree that you're after a different person in the off season who's got a bit more disposable income, etc. Because I should imagine it's relatively easy to get the regulars who want the Sands in something for their kids in the season. Although saying that, I'll take you back a long time. I was down here doing some work. Well, I don't know what year it was, but if I remember rightly, Newquay had a sort of run of nice hotels by the station. And I can remember sitting there one night and I was trying to, one of the magazines, which was the main magazine, we did the AA guest books and hotels guide. I looked at one of the hotels and I thought, well, it's really nice. I said to him, how much is it to stay in here? I was there on business, obviously, so I didn't have to pay. I said, if you come in for the summer, and this is going back donkey's years, it's this price. And I thought, God, I could never afford that. Even though I had a good job then, not like now. I had a good job then, and I couldn't afford it, and I couldn't afford some of the prices now. We go occasional treats to the Nares, head for Sunday lunch because it's good value and other bits and pieces. Haven't had a holiday and don't stay for 13, 14 years. Haven't seen anything of Cornwall yet because my time hasn't allowed it. But I think there's something really missing in the sense that for people to come on holiday here, it's not cheap because you've got the petrol. They're coming from the Midlands and London. It's an expensive cost on petrol here and back for one thing. And I don't know whether we should be looking for sponsorship or someone to encourage some help towards their journey. But you're not going to say, oh, 2 weeks, they don't care what they spend in 2 weeks. It's their holiday, etc. But I still think it's relatively expensive. Driving around, I think there's tacky places for the holiday makers. Never been in there and I'm not target market. Is it Dairy World or something like that? I've told me it's an arm and a leg to go in there with 2 kids. You have to buy their food. You can't take your own in. I've been to the Eden Project once and I would never do that again because that was so expensive. We did with our cheap offset for being a resident in Cornwall. And if you go, when you're a kid, you think, Land's End and John O'Groats. Well, we've been out to, I don't think my wife had ever been there. We went to Land's End when we first came down. Are you proud of Land's End? It looks like Margate or Southend to respect. And that's the end of the UK. And it looks awful. I'm embarrassed to see it there. So I could go on because I haven't got any plus points that I see about offering to people other than the nice, restaurants, etc. The fact that we do all these cheeses now, you're not going on holiday to think, I'm going to go and buy a load of cheese to take back or go and let me look at how many cheeses are in the shop. It's not about that. They're here to have enjoyment and they want to remember it for the right reasons. And I don't think I listen, I've been in the council now for 3.5 years. I listen to say, oh, wonderful Cornwall and peace of mind. It's lovely, lovely. I don't dispute that. Nice beaches when the weather's fine. But they're expecting to go on holiday, hoping the weather's fine. But there's nothing more for them to do. If you stay in a nice hotel, you're made because the hotels are gorgeous. But the rest of it, the poor people stay in these holiday camps and tents. If it rains, or they've got to walk around, on promenades with their hands in their pockets, with kids crying out, saying, "Oh, what are you going to do, Mum and Dad?" I think it's lacking in many places, Cornwall. I don't mean to be. I'm never pessimistic. You know, I've always been in sales and marketing. I'm judged on that, but I think we're not reflection of you. I don't think they're doing themselves these organisations in Cornwall. Thank you.
But right before Malcolm comes in, I just want to just laugh to myself, because anyone who ever claims not to be pessimistic, I'm always cautious about. But I think maybe you've had a run of going to all the places perhaps you shouldn't have been going, because there are some wonderful places that are worth going to. But I, like you, do have concerns about some of these attractions and the cost of them, and the fact that if you have a family that visits Cornwall once and they feel that they're being ripped off, they might not want to come again. And I think maybe that's one of the things you're trying to say, Mike.
Yeah,
there must be, but I mean, do you really come on holiday to you know, if it's beautiful weather, I want to get a suntan, you know, and that's me. I'm a townie, but I'm not sure people want to go around and walk across Bodmin Moor to see what the highest little thing over there is. It Big Woody or something, or Brown Woody. But I mean, do you really want to see that? You want to come here and remember it when you go home. Oh, what did you do? But if you're not in a nice hotel, I think it's limited. There's some gorgeous hotels where the facilities are out of this world with the indoor facilities. That's for a certain marketplace. But the rest of them, you know, I've never been to Dairy World, or whatever it is called, but I just see the signs, and people have come back to me and said, Mike, it's very, very expensive. And I think when I first came down, without being a counsellor or anything, now I heard on Radio Cornwall, and wasn't the famous man who's retired now, because I can't even remember who did it, but people were phoning in saying, look at the money the Eden Project gets. We get nothing for the hospitals like that way. And, you know, the man pleads poverty at times.
I'll give my views. The challenges we face at Land's End is what they call a magnet attraction. People end up going somewhere because it's close enough, which is no excuse. But it makes it very difficult for those guys down there to actually argue to improve it, because it makes money. So it's almost this draw. If you're up in northern Scotland, you just can't help yourself going to John O'Groats, which is owned by the same company, by the way. I think the value for money bit, it is important that, and we address this with the research, that, and on attractions, the interesting thing is the number of theme parks has slowly got less. There used to be Dole up in the southeast, used to be other ones that have disappeared. Great Wild West place up there in the UK. What we are finding, the growth market is about experiences. It is about the surfing, the cycling, the doing things. The other one I would actually say is, and one of the things we like to support, is for businesses to develop on the same site they're already on to grow. It's one of the challenges sometimes with the planners, is that somebody will want to develop more accommodation outlets to support an indoor swimming pool or a small play area. So in the small areas, and I think it's one thing that we should work better at, and networking, but it does take facilitation, is that if you are down on the Rhine Peninsula and there was support for somebody to put in a swimming pool in a play area, that might be located in one place, but it should be for use of other people as well for an accommodation. I can tell you, any self-catering that has decent indoor, not large, swimming pool and a play area, till COVID came along, would be getting 40 weeks a year plus, compared with 2024. It makes a big, big difference. Smaller ones tend to just chuck in a hot tub, which does provide out of season. Not that sustainable, unfortunately. So, and I think the challenge on middle price food and middling attractions is certainly that they have got big challenges. I mean, I'm going to put in this document that attractions that aren't deemed value for money and aren't giving high levels of experience haven't got a long-term future. The customers will not do that. They will go off and do individual. They'd rather pay somebody a lot more to have an individual surf lesson or other lessons and very personal stuff. And the other thing we've got to be honest about in Cornwall, and our attractions are there, compared with the Alton Towers, the Disneys and the Chessingtons, they are sort of third or fourth division. So lots of our customers who come down have paid a lot more to go to the premier theme parks. And that's why their value for money bit, even though it's cheaper here, it's seen as way, way more expensive because the quality isn't there. And we never can. You can put the rides in, and we want them anyway, into attractions when you've only got such a short season and a relatively small number. There's a reason why Alton Towers is in a 12 million catchment area and Chessington's in a 20 million catchment area. So we're better off developing those experiences and those small things that can do it, putting in small facilities in the accommodation providers and letting people mix it. You'll see a lot of hotels now will have houses or apartments as well as a hotel, because that supports the spa and the swimming pool and the gym. And you put those in, and that's where your extra weeks come from. So there's a bit of a planning issue here about a balance. Planning should always be quite tight, but also look at the difference it would make on the seasonality. But quality, I accept. But on some of this, if we get it right, the poor quality will be pushed out. And you're quite right about Eden. I remember sitting down with the new chairman of Eden and explaining that, you know, it is an expensive attraction, and that they did well at 2 million. But when they opened, there were, you know, 4 or 5 million visitors to Cornwall, 3 million to Devon in striking distance of Eden. So getting 2 million visitors in the first few years, 2 or 3 years, was quite easy. At the moment, I'm glad to say that, well, this year's been slightly lower. Normally, 85% of our customers have been to Cornwall quite a few times before. Half of them have been at least once in the last year. They don't go back to attractions if they're not very good. No. So if you look at it that way, there's normally only about 600,000-700,000 new visitors to Cornwall, which remarkably is roughly what Eden gets at its base level. Because the danger is you go once, you really appreciate it, but you're not going to pay 80 quid for a family the next year.
I wasn't really critical of you, Malcolm, because you seem to be you seem to be very honest in what your views are.
Yeah.
Before I question you, your comment about the hotel at Watergate Bay and saying they could have they reduced their number of rooms during COVID?
They have, not by many, because the hotel's easier to stay COVID safe.
Right.
What they've increased is the amount of dining areas and dining in rooms.
Right.
So they started off at about 70% capacity and got up to about 90%. So that 88 is based on the reduced capacity.
Yeah. And the other thing I came across when I was on the Neighbourhood Novi Scrutiny Committee, about weddings. I don't think they were doing themselves justice, Cornwall Council, on the weddings. And from my background, I've worked on magazines like Vogue and Harper's and Tatler. And I said to her, have you not pushed to put, get a advertorial in there? And they were going to speak to me. That was about 3 years ago, because, it is sort of my background. But they never did. So, I mean, again, if you're looking to get decent spend, the larger hotels are going to be a bit more outgoing than just looking at people from Cornwall or Devon, really. And people will come. People will come down. But I think they're missing a trick with the weddings. When they can go.
I think we're missing a trick on a couple of ones. One is weddings. The other one is funerals and celebrations of post-funeral.
Yeah.
The Donkey Sanctuary in Devon gets about £20 million from bequests a year. And I've always thought, and I've suggested this to the parks people, and it's awkward, and I would have done it to my mum, is a lot of people would probably donate to support the coastal path a bit more if there was some way of a remembrance book or a calm with their names on. I think there's tricks we can. The love of Cornwall is so strong that I work out about 2 million people that have got a deep love of Cornwall who visit frequently, and that's 4 times the population. And that's, I think, where we tie a lot with food. But I think we could be a bit smarter on, in a very ethical and good way, extracting cash out of them.
Yeah. Thank you.
Extracting cash. That's what we like, Malcolm. Well done. Right, we've done a full round robin of the panel, and we're joined today by Linda Taylor. So even though Jim McKenna has indicated, Linda, I'd like to bring you in, please. And nice to see you, Taylor.
Yeah, I was just going to say good afternoon, LeBroy. How are you?
Thank you. Good.
Right, well, I really appreciate you letting me come in. Rather bizarrely, at 2:30, I've got a tourism interview with Cardiff University. But I did want to pick up on some points about Airbnb, which is of a huge concern to a lot of people. And I don't know if you all know that the short lettings platform, which is Airbnb, have now entered into negotiations with HMRC, where they have actually declared their lettings information to HMRC. So where a lot of people have probably thought they could get away with the rent a room and get that tax allowance of up to 7,500, that's not the case, especially if they're Airbnb a second or a third or a fourth home. So I would absolutely endorse the fact we do need to get Airbnb licensed or registered. From personal observations that have been made to me, Airbnb can actually change the very fabric of a residential area and turn it into a nightclub scenario. That's a slightly over exaggerating, but I think you get the sense of what can be happening in some of our communities. No, for St Ives, they're doing incredibly well on their bookings and endorsing exactly what Malcolm said. The people who are now coming to Cornwall in the winter, the large majority of them have what I call disposable income, and they don't mind paying to stay somewhere nice, and they want to have good experiences. And I also think that one of the things we should collectively be looking to do is absolutely promote our creative arts, our food, and our culture. And I think it needs to be a really big joined up exercise. So where you would go to other locations and go to what I would call an absolute superior food market, this is the sort of thing we need to be encouraging throughout Cornwall during the winter months with, you know, our real top produce. I also think as well that we do need to promote what's happening in Cornwall. And I also think watching Simon Reed's programme last night, to me, there seemed absolute potential to absolutely encourage what I call bizarre excursions, like down the mine, you know, go and have a look at the China Clay and have a tour around there. I just think we have got so much scope where we could really join together and really, really promote and make sure that when people leave Cornwall, they leave a little bit poorer because they've spent their money here with us. And thank you for letting me come in, Peter.
Pleasure. Thank you. Although we want them to go back poorer, we want them to go back happy. So that's my key thing. Malcolm, would you like to respond, or shall I bring in Jim?
No, I think the Airbnb is quite an issue. We have got the support of the Devon and Cornwall Police Chief Constable, because even on something else I should have mentioned on, we did have a problem, and it probably is recurring, about the use by not just Airbnb, all the sharing platforms, of people like county lines. And we did have an issue actually of sex industry, because they can go in and use it could happen in the other sectors, I accept that, but it's so much easier on the short let. Is they take a property for a week, they use it for 2 or 3 days. The people turning up look as though they're delivering takeaways in the case of drugs, you know. And before people go, there's an awful lot of men got into that cottage, they're gone. So it's actually quite an interesting thing about even the police accept that they would like to know what properties may be being let. So it's not just about the level playing field. So I think the registration, and bearing in mind, that we still get harangued in the press about Penhallow fire, the one in 2007, was it Penhallow anyway, in Newquay. They're quite serious issues, because it's the most, if you've ever gone into a holiday cottage, you will see that they've got to have fireproof furniture, everything else. Not having to go at any of you, I'll only put my hand up. My house that I live in every day would not pass the requirements to let it out. I couldn't guarantee everything's fireproof. I've had to check done. When would I get my electrics checked? I haven't done it recently. It's not, you walk across this line. And the other thing sometimes, like Linda said, Councillor Taylor, with the tax, there's also the issue that people can actually be breaking the agreement with their landlord or mortgage company and be uninsured because they're letting it out without permission from their insurers, which can all be fixed. And there are some people who do Airbnb really well, comply by the rules, have got the right insurance, do get the place checked. But other people just do it innocently, but it's unfair on competition, but also could actually be very dangerous for the consumer. And actually could get somebody who might be doing it to earn a few extra bob in financial difficulty of being uninsured.
Thank you, Malcolm. So I've got Jim, and then when Jim's spoken, we'll go to David.
Peter, thank you. It's a quick question for Malcolm. It's just in relation to the circular economy, Malcolm. You mentioned the importance of keeping the money that's generated in Cornwall, and every pound generated sort of lives on several times. Do you think, and I don't think this involves biting the hand that feeds you anymore, do you think that the council could do more in relation to how it spends its money? Because members, there was a notice of motion council before last, which I think has been passed on to a committee to evaluate. But the council does better than it did. But I'm sure there's, I personally think a lot of others do, there's scope for it to do more in terms of commissioning more locally and spending more locally. So do you think that would have an impact and might act as an example to others?
Yes, I do. I think it's a real challenge, and I haven't got the answer. But since a lot of regulations came in public procurement, it actually knocks out lots of small providers.
Exactly.
Because of the bureaucracy of public procurement, and therefore what they tend to be is subcontractors to somebody else who takes a lion's share of the money. So to my mind is, how do we get to a situation, either with business support, training, flexing the system, where you can have protection of public spending without the big stick of public procurement?
Yeah.
So a more fit for purpose, fit for Cornwall public procurement system.
Right, and is that something that your organisation could contribute to if asked?
Yes, I mean, there's lots of people who would probably like to. I mean, this will give you an indication of our own situation. When I was within Cornwall Development Company in public procurement, we have a contact centre, a call centre.
Yes.
We put it out to tender, and I included the TICs in it. And the tenders came in like this: a well-known national contracting company starting with S and ending in O, Serco, came in £148,000. A regional one, which was a big operator, was about 90,000, and somebody else, I can't remember who was, just under 70,000. Truro TIC picked it up for less than 10, because they can do it as part of their in-between job. Yeah. They didn't have to have a recruitment. Admittedly, that's out of hours, but they can fit that in. Now that helps Truro TIC with some money. But that gives you the difficulty you're not stuck with a certain list of people providing. That's probably an extreme example, but I think there are ways. I think also the circular economy wider in Cornwall Council is helping suppliers come together in cooperatives to supply the industry better. We've got a great little one's just opened up, the Greek who's supplying people and buying it. We could actually be developing innovations in the supply chain to get between producer and purchaser, rather than just necessarily going to 365 or one of the big providers.
Well, a number of the small fishermen down west are actually advertising on Facebook as they're fishing, and they basically walk into sales, and I think they're probably doing better than they were previously. So it can be done. So, okay, thank you. That's really helpful.
Thanks, Jim. And David, please.
Yes, thank you, Councillor LeBroy. David Rodder, Economic Growth Manager for Cornwall Council. Just picking up on the point made by Councillor McLennan about weddings. One of the things that the team does in his day job is help businesses access the various grants available from DEFRA. And wedding venues has probably been one of the most popular over the last 5 or 10 years, or certainly 5 years. It used to be tourism accommodation, but that's not currently eligible. Then it moved on to livery stables and workshop units and those sorts of things, and farm shops. But one of the key things now is wedding venues. So there's probably, off the top of my head, 5 or 6 now. Probably the most well-known one is Nancarrow Farm, Marans and Vaux, which is very popular and very high quality, booked up solid for a Saturday for well in advance. And I think there's 5 or 6 others that we've either helped or in the process of helping at the moment. So it is a definite growing trade away from the normal hotels, because what the farm-based and rural-based businesses tend to offer is exclusivity. So you've got the Nancarrow, for example. I believe their business model is, if you're having it for a wedding, you rent it for 3 days. And it's yours for 3 days, and you can be there before, stay overnight with the wedding party, decorate the hall as you, or the barn there as you wish it, and then you can stay there rather than the hotel, which tends to be you're there with lots and lots of other people, and you're in and out, in an evening. So there's a place for both, but it is a definite growth market.
Brilliant.
I agree, and the real value end is being personal and unique, and that's what Nancaro do. Because the hotels tend to be a bit more formulaic. They have to.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks for that, Dave, and thanks, Malcolm. While I'm just the cogs in my mind are turning, having listened to all of this, it seems to me is that Cornwall is not necessarily a place for roller coasters, but it's a place where we must actually understand how to leverage the best value out of our natural capital, and understanding what that natural capital is of it, isn't it? So very obviously the sea and the beaches, but I think just the outdoor space and the fresh air and the opportunity to connect to the environment is a massive thing for us here.
And I think the culture and heritage weaves into that two things. I think what we have got, which is why we're doing the 50 plus things, and it'll be the A to Z after Christmas, but put on because of the lockdown, is we've got to get across that in addition to that great environment, there's so many wonderful places to go, from 50 plus museums to open studios. I would love to see open studios maybe open every Tuesday during the winter, because we've got some great artists, and I think there's lots of innovations you could do that don't require millions of pounds and pouring concrete. It's about packaging it. Well, it's about presenting all the wonderful little gems we've got, from the health and healing market through to arts and culture and heritage, and taking people on walks and explaining. It's a sort of it's like the Coast and the Time Team and the Country File type market and the Autumn Watch. All that sort of market is amazingly powerful, and we've got that product. Like you said, we don't need another theme park. If somebody came along now and said they're going to build an Alton Towers or Centre Park, so I would be saying that's the wrong thing to do.
Totally.
Cornwall should be that in the nicest possible way, without risking the wrath of people in Cornwall. We can be outside and explore the amazing that's there, and when the weather's a bit off, there are plenty of other things to do. And often you see the other thing about having a whole sort of smorgasbord of activities and experiences is, and I did get in trouble once for saying this on Radio Devon many years ago, there aren't many people who go on holiday on their own. I did say Billy and Jilly no mates, and I was back for 2 hours to do a phone in with lots of people go on holiday on their own. So I've never said that before. But actually that means that most holidays, and if you've got 4 people, a couple of couples in there, there's a bit of a compromise needed. Some be interested in that, some be interested in the other. So having the breadth of experiences is actually, and we've got it here, but what we're not doing is getting it across to people. And I think more than ever, and I've noticed it this autumn for some reason, it's rather irritating because it normally gets quieter where I walk, is people have got in the old joke about it's not the wrong weather, it's the wrong clothing. I think having been locked down for those weeks, there seems to be more of a desire to be out than ever this year. A lot more people, you having to go a lot further away to be on your own if you're miserable like me with a dog.
And me.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I was going to say, I didn't thank you, Malcolm, for being the first person to utter the word workation, which I think is fantastic. So I heard it from you first, and I think that does have huge value for us going forward. I certainly have worked doing my council business in all 4 corners of the country whilst visiting my children, and you really wouldn't know where I was because you can do this sort of thing anywhere. Mike McLennan, please. You had an X in the box.
Just a quick question, Malcolm. I think it was really good how you sort of mentioned the number of people who actually were down here when they said millions are down here on holiday in Cornwall. You probably know the accurate figures more than anybody else. What's your view on the sort of bad press that was going around at the time saying, "Oh, we don't want you down here. You're going to give us COVID." Do you think that was just passed over people's heads who did try and come down on holiday, or do you think you need to have to do a little bit of PR on that for future year if we can have holidays?
Yeah, it was. We did some research, and the good news is 99% of the people who came here didn't feel that at all.
Right.
And unfortunately, human nature, particularly Cornish human nature, is to mutter loudly in the pub, but not necessarily back it up outside, as my father would have said.
Yeah.
So I think there was a lot of, and that was picked up on the wonderful Cornwall Live, my favourite news channel, Fox News. Stirred up a bit of that, really, and understandable worries. And there were instances, but some of it at points were urban myths. I mean, in 2 weeks, I heard of 6 holiday parks with all that 11 people with COVID, which wasn't true.
Yeah.
So that's the good news, is the people who came down, 97%, I got the figures here, felt that Cornwall had done a really good job on preparing for COVID safe, and 99% really enjoyed it, and didn't actually feel they weren't welcome. Of the people who didn't come, 21% didn't come because they didn't think they'd be welcome.
Right.
So we've got a challenge that some people went, oh, I wasn't welcome, I'm not going back. Those that came down are probably our best advocates, is that it was more news than substance, but there was some substance within it.
Okay, thank you.
That makes sense.
Thanks. And Jane Pascoe, please.
Yeah, it's just a thought, actually, Malcolm. I wondered what the impact, the financial impact may have been, or has it been sort of tracked with the ports and marinas being closed most of the summer? And if it had, are there lessons to be learned of how we could attract more yachties and boaties down here? I mean, for example, I know there hasn't been the cross-channel sailing, has there? And I imagine it's quite a big expenditure when they come into port, actually, per capita, because they do all eat on shore, they buy provisions and various other stuff. So I just wondered if you've been able to track that at all, if it's been noticeable or what's happened.
We haven't had the figures back yet, but as somebody with a boat, by the way, it was very noticeable. The 1 week when you could get to Scillies and back easily, I did take a week off, and the Isles of Scillies was rammed full of boats because people were desperate.
Yes.
It is a big market. I mean, if I had my magic wand and I didn't have to pay for it personally, marina in Looe, another facility in Penzance and Newlyn would drive more people from turning round at the Halford and going back up the other way, and striking distance. It is a market. It's a very valuable market if you're in the retail and the restaurant market. Like most of us who spend all day or 2 days on a boat, you do want to get off, have a shower, and go and sit down on land. It is one of those occupations. So if you do look at the places, and Salcomb's the classic in Devon, but Falmouth does very well at it as well, and Foy, you just got to look at the eateries that wouldn't survive without that boating market.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about Looe, because we sail out of Plymouth, but we meet loads of people at Dartmouth, and they come across the channel in Dartmouth and then straight down to Foy, because they can't get in. We can't go into Looe, and we can't go into so many others. So yeah, I absolutely agree. But I do know that it's the expenditure can be quite large, can't it? I just wondered if we got some lessons learned by not having them here, if it had been noticeable by not having them in the ports, being allowed to come in or go out, even whether it's
one thing I'd have to look into, but I'm sure it was.
Yes,
because there's a limited number of moorings, so once it opened up, they had more difficulty in catching up than anybody else.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and a lot of boats got left out of the water and never went back in anyway, didn't they? Okay, thanks.
And half of the boats where I was didn't go in. They all thought the summer was going to be over, so they got caught out that way. But yes, it's a very localized market, but a very good market. And of course, it supports those other induced jobs like the boatyards, electricians, and all the people that have to go out and repair boats. For every
boat, there's probably a lot of suppliers, aren't there? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so thanks, Malcolm. I think maybe more or less the last word, hopefully, from me now. And it's a bit of an odd question, but do you see the COVID issue as an opportunity for the tourism industry in Cornwall?
Yes, I do, and a good opportunity, but hopefully there will be a vaccine and will be the destination of choice. I'll explain that really. I think some of the challenges we had this year with visitors, and we had some fascinating questions and complaints of why was the tide out on the south coast, because they'd gone across from the north coast because it was out there. So why was it also out on the south coast? And we did have some grumpy people who were used to going to all-inclusive resorts. And we've seen some of that with the Litter and a few other ones. It is used to a different style. So I think we want to be the destination of choice, not fallback. But I think what you will see is that a lot of people did actually enjoy it and discover it. But also, I think we will see that richer market, maybe not so keen to just fly around the world or fly off. It won't be that they will choose Cornwall instead of ever going abroad, but it will probably go on their list as one of the ones they'll drop. Because I think there, it's something we were predicting before. It's a well-known thing in tourism and the travel agents and everybody else. The older you get, the shorter you tend to travel. So most people over 60, 70 don't really fancy doing a flight to Australia. So it tends to get closer. And it tends to get easier to get them to do other things. And they're the wealthy market. So I think overall it will be good. I think it's accelerated some of the decisions we've got to make. And it's put a spotlight on particularly the over-tourism bit of where we don't want to go, because that will just drive prices down. But we do want people to be the first choice, not the fallback. There's a dent in my nose, you can't see, from 1976, when some lovely lads from Birmingham, when I was in Falmouth, asked me where the nearest Indian restaurant was, and I answered honestly, which was Plymouth. That's the last thing I remember. Apparently they thought I was being cheeky. But you did have a problem in the 70s for anybody who was around, and lots of people were here, quotes, they couldn't afford a proper holiday. So although we are expensive, and I get that, it's actually that makes us a holiday of choice, not of compromise or fallback. And the sooner we're back to that, I think then we can really build to go forward.
Okay, so Malcolm, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate everything you've brought to us. I think we've got your recommendations already, which you gave to us at the end of your sort of introductory piece. I think you said 3, but ended up with 4, because you're talking about an academic research facility for hospitality and tourism, which I thoroughly endorse and would like to see a number of, if I'm honest. Particularly up here in my neck of the woods, we quite like the idea of having some college type training for people that are going for some of the base level qualifications, such as food safety and so on. So we're really supportive of that idea, and certainly supportive of the higher end of the educational aspect of really looking into what's going on into that part of the industry. So thank you very much indeed, Malcolm. Appreciate your time very much. That's very kind of you. And we'll leave you to it. You're welcome to stay with us, or you can leave us as you wish.
Thanks.
I'll give a listening brief if that's okay. If you don't mind me doing that.
Cheers, Malcolm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I can see that Anne van der Meulen from the Federation of Small Businesses. Anne, would you like to turn your video on and say hello?
Yeah. Hello. Good afternoon. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Thank you for joining us, Anne. It's very kind of you. Obviously, you know what this inquiry is all about. It's about the economic vitality of our rural and coastal areas. That is everything that isn't the towns and the city of Cornwall. And obviously, we've asked if you could give a little bit of insight into how your feelings are on the economy of Cornwall. So I invite you to take the floor and lead us.
Thank you. I have a few slides just to show you, just to give you something other to look at other than myself, and also act as an aid memoir from me too. Just going to work out how I do this now. Bear with. I don't know if you can you see that? Not yet. Just working out how I share that. Let me just see. Let me just, sorry, it's different on all of these different things. Let me just see if I've got this right. Is that sharing? Yes, no?
No, sorry.
Oh dear. Bear with me. Let's have one more go. Right. I'm not quite sure how it does that. Okay, yeah, I may need sharing rights. I'm not sure. Apologies.
David, perhaps you'd be able to help us?
Let's see. Sorry.
And if you email it to me, I can probably share it.
That would be great, actually. Okay. Bear with.
Just make sure you use my my council email address, david.rodder@cornwall.gov.uk.
I mean, alternatively, I can just go without. Actually, I'll just refer to it. It'll just save a bit of time. Otherwise, I don't want to take up time in technical issues. So if we just run along with the PowerPoint, and I'll just go through my my slides and just talk through it. I can let you have the slides afterwards if that's better. So that's no problem. So I'll carry on with the presentation because obviously I know time is of the essence for you, and there's a few things to talk about on here. Basically, I'm guessing that you all know who the FSB is, and that we are an organisation that looks after small businesses. We've got about 4,000 business members in Cornwall, and they're spread all over Cornwall. And on the presentation, there is a map of where people are, so it'll probably be interesting for you to have a copy of this anyway. Just a few things I wanted to cover actually were some lessons from lockdown, which I think are really important, and obviously the world has changed. I don't know, actually, is my camera still on? My camera's gone off, sorry. I think that's, there we are, that's better. So lessons from lockdown. Things have changed, and it's actually only gone and highlighted exactly how important small businesses are in those very rural and coastal areas. Also, the impact of poor communications in those cases. Things like skills, the barriers to business, and the EU transition and mental health are all things that I just wanted to touch on, and we can perhaps discuss a little more fully. So just to go to the lessons from lockdown, small businesses have been absolutely vital, and I think we've all seen it on the news how they have helped their communities, and I think in a way that's brought the appreciation of small businesses and the difficulties they face as well to the fore. In a report, New Horizons, which the FSB conducted, now this is a national survey, most of our surveys are national, but it is indicative of what happens also in Cornwall. 57% of the small firms were carrying out community roles during the crisis, and I would imagine that would be even more actually within Cornwall and with some of those small rural areas. 30% of all business owners prioritised and supported their vulnerable customers, with around 19% of them offering free home deliveries. That was also really important to the surrounding community, but also very important to the businesses themselves as well, to be able to keep going and obviously to keep some customers and trade going. 30% of the small businesses reported that they'd altered their business practices and accommodated from working from home. So those that weren't necessarily customer facing had gone into those home working environments. And 24% of businesses had adopted or increased their use of digital technologies, so dreaded Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and all of those things, just to facilitate working from home. And for those businesses that are expected to remain open, that figure rises to 39% that they will actually change what they're doing in the future, which leads on nicely to what I'm going to say next, because 16% of small businesses developed a new or increased their online presence, and that would certainly be very sure for those rural and coastal businesses that obviously it was difficult for them to get anywhere. So I wanted to just touch on a report, a national survey again that we had called Lost Connections. So the impact of poor broadband and mobile coverage on small businesses is huge. I know we're very, very fortunate to have some of the better broadband communications, but I think it's interesting just to touch on for those who don't have access, or that their connections and so on are fluctuating or not consistent. I think it's important to realise just the impact of what the problem is. So 45% of small businesses experience unreliable voice connectivity. So mobile issues are probably more of an issue here than I would say broadband, but we still do have those issues. But that would be rising to 57% in more rural areas. So there's a big difference between that connectivity in the rural areas, which means that 32% said they were prevented from contacting or being contacted by customers. Obviously, huge barrier to trade, and of course 31% said it was a very definite barrier to the growth of their business, and 26% said that they had lost business or sales because of it. So digital communications more now than ever are with the movement of people being restricted is a real opportunity to expand the brand of Cornwall across the world. And geography doesn't have to be as limiting if we can get this actually right. So I mean, a recommendation there is really not to rest on our laurels of past broadband success, and the consistency needs attention. Are the companies or the businesses really getting that broadband delivery that they're paying for? Does seem to be an inconsistency. I mean, I myself live in a coastal area, and whilst we have the direct fibre to the cabinet here, and I can see the cabinet from my house, very often it still does drop out. So I think the consistency of connection is very important. So obviously things like direct fibre, and with planning permission for new builds and so on, having direct fibre, that would certainly help. And obviously mast rollouts as well, and rollout of 5G, however that's going to happen. Those sorts of things are really, really important now to keep Cornwall on the map and keep us trading with the rest of the world, and there is an opportunity there. Just going on to sort of connectivity with people is skills and people. The other issues obviously are well read actually in the fact that small businesses do have difficulty getting people to work, transport, parking, those kinds of things. It is always going to be a challenge, because our rural and coastal towns and villages were not necessarily made for the kind of transport that we actually need now. Which also then leads on to getting and keeping the right skills, because obviously access to training, transport for your apprentices and so on, that goes back to digital as well. So if you are having your people working for you on a digital, they still need to have that digital connectivity. In our rural and coastal areas, we also have an aging population, so people tend to retire to these lovely places. So actually the vitality there is also a tricky balance. And we also find, that a lot of small businesses, they do find that it's difficult to, keep Cornwall as the place for young people to live and work. I mean, they love living here, they love to come and surf, and they like the things that go on here, but actually, is it a lifestyle? And also that leads on to then affordable housing for people who are living and working here, to be able to afford their own homes and not just to be able to rent them from people. They need to be able to build up their own stamina on the housing market. That then leads me on to the barriers to business. So other things, we're full of old buildings in rural and coastal areas, so they have higher maintenance costs, getting the right premises as well. So that need to relocate, to expand that sort of stock of premises of where people can go next. It's kind of difficult if you're in the middle of Mevergissey and you want to expand somewhere else. Where do you go? Which also leads on to the small streets, the access, the parking, the loading, which equals sometimes parking tickets, and that is an additional cost and additional stress to businesses as well. So perhaps something needs to be looked at in the access situation. Things like flooding insurance as well, and actually higher premiums or being able to get insurance in the first place. And when, of course, a business floods, it has to shut, and also loss of stock, loss of trading, which is a huge cost. So flooding is probably an issue both in coastal, obviously, and in rural areas where there are rivers and watercourses and so on. Business rates are always an issue, and any other costs obviously are an issue. And of course, again, public transport, the ease of getting your customers and your staff access is a barrier to where you might well place your business. There's another quirky one, which is cash points. Whilst we haven't really been using cash whilst we've been in lockdown, there is still a need for cash points, and only actually a very good example of that, again, where I live, the local shop was only able to take cash, and there is no cash point in the village, and the nearest one is about I don't know, 6 mile drive away. So it's I think important to actually recognise that there is still a need for that, being able to circulate with cash, and some of the very small businesses here, when that card machine goes down, or people don't have access to mobiles to be able to pay on their mobile as they would normally do in some other more built up area, that can also be an issue. And also access to funds is also a thing for businesses here. In the distribution of the COVID measures, I have to say very quickly here, a big thank you to Ian Stevens and his team at the council, who I know have worked immensely hard to get the grants and everything out to the businesses. And I know they're about to go through another round of it, and it's painful, and it's a lot of work for them. So I would say a big thank you to them, because they are doing a great job there. And the speed at which those measures actually get out to businesses has been hugely appreciated, and also hugely beneficial to those who have been able to get it. But anything like rebates, so going back to business rates, and so making sure that anybody has got access to those rebates, that they are well aware of them, that maybe they're automatically given out, and anything that's easy and fast for businesses is something that's really going to help them at the moment. Last couple of things, EU transition, that's really the elephant in the room. It includes those obviously rural and coastal communities who have got an awful lot of other things on their plate, and it may come as a bit of a shock to them. Now, we do have an information hub on our website, which is fsb.org.uk/campaign/UK transition. This is all on the slides that I will send you, and it's something that I don't know what the council can do to help, but it is perhaps something on a communication basis, that, you know, we don't want businesses to be sat there in our rural and coastal communities in particular, having hidden away and thinking, well, I haven't done anything about this, not being able to export their goods. Certainly our rural and coastal businesses are very good at, you know, providing the very Cornish marvellous sort of goods that they could actually send out to the rest of the world, had they just managed to get their EU authorizations and so on, and licenses and things done in advance. So there may be something on communication there. And my last point on mental health, I think is very, very important for everybody, but for those running small businesses, and the FSB's Wellbeing Guide, which we published back in 2018 in actual fact, and so it's probably even worse now, but an extra estimated 300,000 people across the UK lose their job each year due to a mental health problem. So that's productivity lost, days off work. Small business owners have their own pressures on top of their concern for their staff, and small communities often rally around each other, but it is also very well hidden sometimes in these small communities. You know, the stigma of it still is a difficult one, and if you're alone in a rural or coastal business, you might even be supporting your members of staff who are feeling a bit down, who are having difficulties, and particularly in this time where we've got a sort of a pandemic crisis going on as well. I think we basically need to make sure that the mental health services and the access to them is very easy and very clear for small business people, because it is the old adage, no shoe, no horse, and it's no you, no business. So it's very important. And I think actually to a final point is just the whole thing about attitude. I think we need to raise attitude and aspiration. And basically that's my summary.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne. So what we've done in terms of the process of these panel meetings is that there are three other councillors as well as myself on this, and I'm inviting the panel in turn to have a chat with you about how they feel your conversation went. So we went to Jim first last time, so we'll go to Mike McLennan first this time, please.
Good afternoon, Anne. Nice to listen to you.
Good afternoon.
Do you find there's any truth in the rumour that I read today, false news probably, that the government have saved some businesses that were perhaps going to go under anyway?
I think that there is a possibility of that, certainly. I mean, you know, the way in which certainly the business rates grant was initially sent out, it's such a quick and dirty way to get money out to people, but the speed at which it had to be delivered, I think there was probably there is some evidence of the fact that, you know, potentially, and I think we'll see later on where, you know, as much help has been given to some businesses and they'll still go under anyway. And I think, you know, it's perhaps unavoidable, I think the difficulty that we're facing now with the second part of the discretionary grants, we've been talking about that only today, is that there is that differentiation between the speed of getting money out to people on a very sort of light sort of basis of criteria, down to actually, okay, so do we look at your accounts and how do we assess, you know, the viability of those businesses? So yeah, I agree that there would have been mistakes made. I think they're trying to avoid doing that going through the next lot, but yeah, it's a difficult one.
It was an emergency. Yeah, it was an emergency.
It was absolutely.
And it still is. I don't know if you know where I live. I'm in St Stephen in Branwell division, which not many people have heard of. I think it's in between St Austell and Truro, but not.
I know. Yes, I do know it. Yeah.
The local businesses, and we've got 2 or 3 sort of shops. We've got lots of farm shops that have opened up, etc., and they're starting again now to push, and they do home deliveries. I get this. This throws me a bit because we have our own meetings at Cornwall Council about the future, etc. They say, please support the local businesses, which are always trying to do. But those people who are tight on money, they sometimes say to me, we gave out vouchers for hardship during the. I've still got some that we developed ourselves. So we had some of the local shop. And they said, please, Mike, could you change them and get them for Asda or Sainsbury's because things are a bit cheaper. And we get more for the £15 voucher. So that's again a difficult one to people who are tight on money, where they can't afford to use the local shop because they say the price is a bit inflated compared to the supermarkets. How can we support you on that one? Because it's getting that message over to the residents to say, come on, we were looked after by the small shops. I'm not saying the supermarkets didn't help out as well, but you know, we want to try and support the local shops, but it's a difficult one for a certain part of the marketplace with residents.
Yeah, I think it's basically the message is economies of scale as well. You know, the more of the local residents that go and use the local shop, the better stocked they will be, and perhaps, you know, the more they sell, the sort of the less margin they need to make to be able to keep their doors open. So it's almost explaining how the economies of scale are going to work. I don't know how easy that's going to be to people who actually just want to go and get something the cheapest way they can. The other thing I would say is, I mean, where I live, for example, the local shop here, it's about a 10-mile drive to the next supermarket, and they've supported you, and I think it is that use it or lose it kind of mentality, because the local shops don't just provide what they sell. You know, they are a place for some of our, elderly residents to go to. A lot of the elderly residents here will only go and use the local shop, for example. So I think it's about actually maybe a bit of PR, a bit of hype about it. I know you've got Cornwall Council have got a Keep It Cornish website that's going, maybe something through that. We can just highlight actually what the small businesses have done, and how much they do need supporting. Yes, it is perhaps a little bit more expensive, but it is, you know, that they are there to provide a service, and they do need to have those margins in order to keep the doors open. Otherwise they won't be there at all.
Oh, that's a good answer, and I support you on that. The other view I have is, when you say small businesses, what does that include for you? Is it mainly retail or other organisations?
It's everybody. So we for the FSB, we actually are an organisation that isn't sector specific, and I would say our demographic is very much the sort of mirrors the demographic of some of the information that was given out in advance of this particular meeting as well, that was very helpfully came from on the economic data. So it's a wide range of businesses that we have in touch with.
Yeah, no, I think you're doing a good job. So, you know,
thank you.
We're trying to support the small shops in my division. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you. Perfect. Great to hear that.
Thank you. Bye.
It is always difficult, Mike, isn't it? Because realistically, I mean, I've run a small shop in my past, and we always tried to, where we possibly could, be reasonably competitive or comparative to supermarket prices. And I think often it's just a mindset thing. The small corner shops are often really not that much more expensive, and the prices are not that far out. Where they do fall out is where supermarkets are able to do these loss leaders and have big promotions on products. And you can say, you know, if you get a giant packet of Daz for £5.99 or whatever it is, and you can never compete with that with a small business. And the margins are tiny on grocery goods. You know, so the average corner shop, they're probably lucky if they're making maybe even 15% margin on a lot of the products they're selling. So it is flipping tricky. Jane Pascoe, would you like to have a turn and a chat with Anne?
Yes, hello Anne. Hi.
Hello Jane, hi.
Hello. I was just interesting to hear what you were actually saying about the small shops and businesses, and you may recall when we had the Porthouse Circus arrive in Liskeard. As one of the village elders or the oldest businesses in town, I did actually have to take her out onto the street, the high street, stand her there and say, actually, when you are, because you know that you knew the form of the programme, that she sort of rubbished a lot of shops and then bummed up a few. And I said, you know, be careful who you're insulting. These shopkeepers aren't anonymous. You see that shop there? Well, he's the chairman of the sports club. I'm Liskeard Show Chamber of Commerce. That one down there, he's a fireman. So they're not just shopkeepers. They do so much more in the community. And that's where the loyalty comes, hopefully, from the customers, that they recognise that they aren't just anonymous shopkeepers taking money off them. They're out there to help and really be part of the community. So I was interested to hear you say that. That wasn't one of my questions, really. It was, we're doing this inquiry about the interaction between what goes on in the rural hinterlands, the economy in the rural hinterlands or the coastal towns, and the town centres. And I've always sort of had this debate that in my town, we still have 3 high street banks and another bank. And we have all our professional services because of the rural economy, which in our case is agriculture and things, and then tourism and so on. And I think that's very important, because if we've got a vibrant economy out there, then hopefully the towns will be sustainable. The problem I always see is the connectivity with the towns, and the people aren't encouraged to use the towns because of the punitive parking costs and all those things that, you know, FSB members and Chamber of Commerce members are always having to bang the drum about, but nobody ever listens. And I'm just wondering if it is your view that it is so much more important what goes on around the towns that makes the raison d'etre to what those towns are.
Absolutely. I think you know, that from sort of some of the larger towns, like I mean, I would say sort of, you know, places like Liskeard and so on are quite large, and then you've got, you know, where I live in Downderry, so it's that there is a spin-off, because obviously a lot of people will go from Downderry to Liskeard because that's their main place to go and get shopping and banking and so on, and use the cash point and all of those things. So yes, there is a definite link, but I think there is an issue for public transport there. I think it needs to be much slicker, much more joined up. Much more intuitive. I know it's very difficult to run an all singing, all dancing sort of connected service, but it is, you know, it's one of those things where people getting to work, for example, or anybody wanting to go and do their shopping. I mean, I mentioned some of the elderly people here in our village. Well, they won't go to Liskeard because it's not easy for them to get there, you know, unless the community bus or something like that goes there, you know. So that's really the, you know, as you were saying, what's going on around the outside brings people into the town, and what's on offer in the town. And I would say further, actually, that talking about things like high streets, I think COVID has actually brought back into focus the need for the high street and the actual need for people to actually want to see each other. And actually the high street is a place for that, and it needs to change so that you can have make it more of a destination as well as a as well as a place of commerce. But I think it's very important to make sure that people can get there and there's something on offer, and also it helps to each business that is there. It needs to make sense. I mean, back in the old days when there was a baker and a butcher and a dairy and in your village, well, you stayed there because they all made sense. None of them sort of took over each other's trade. But I think when you've got some of the bigger out of town supermarkets and the bigger places like B&M and what have you, who also sell food and so on, it does detract from what's going on in the local town.
Yes, and that's always been the planning argument with the towns against those out of town stores being allowed to sell all other things as well, hasn't it? And we've fought many campaigns against that, and again always failed because we just haven't got the clout, small businesses all together, to do that, and that's a great pity. But thank you for that.
Yes, pleasure.
The real way of stopping out of town developments, of course, is just by not going to them, which does actually seem to be happening, because I don't think there are any new ones in Cornwall planned at all at the moment. So I'm quite happy with the way things are progressing on that. Jim, please.
Peter, thank you, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Jim.
From
good afternoon.
Just on the out of town stuff, Pete, we managed in Penzance to stop the council acquiring the recently built one on the edge of Penzance a year ago. So it is still new to some people that out of town shopping is a bad thing in terms of town centres, but that was successfully achieved. So there you go. And in terms of your organisation, I know you do a lot of campaigning on things like tax, on things like business rates and stuff. Do you work collaboratively with the economic units at the council? For example, do you sort of share campaigns so you can, I know you say together we are stronger, I think is the organisation's motto. I was a bit worried that might be the Labour Party, but I checked and it wasn't. So, that was all right. So how closely do you work with Cornwall Council? Because you represent the majority of businesses, I guess.
Yes. And
is there anything this panel should know that we could possibly put in as a suggestion if you don't?
Okay. Yes, I do. I believe we work quite closely, and we get involved in quite a few consultations. I guess that's why I'm here. So there is that relationship. We also have the Economic Recovery Group, which meets every Monday, people from the council are there, and we are part of that, which obviously you will probably be aware of. That's hugely successful, actually, and has actually been another success of COVID. Actually, I mean, it started as soon as the lockdown happened, and we found actually it stops us from having to drive to Truro every 5 minutes, and an hour every Monday seems to be to cover far more ground than actually going to lots and lots of different meetings with the same people around the table, but just with a different agenda about a different topic. So we work with them very much on that. Yes, and also I've worked with the regulatory service quite a lot as well, Stuart Benson and so on. And we do quite a lot there, and helping to just promote the good work that they're doing, and some of the help and advice, and obviously I've given some advice and guidance on that. So I would say certainly at that level, it might be that we would necessarily want to get involved more with things like the leadership board, because I know that the Chamber of Commerce and so on are represented on there, but and I think there is maybe a school of thought that if there is a business representative on there, then that's good enough. But I think businesses are different and come in all shapes and sizes, and I would imagine that actually maybe the very small businesses aren't necessarily represented quite so well on those higher level things. So it would be good to get involved more with that.
Okay, and from a collaborative perspective, that was going to be one of my questions. Do you work with the bids for those towns that have them and the chambers?
So so with the our work with the chambers is more with the Cornwall Chamber of Commerce, but we obviously are there to support any of the activities that go on in any of the towns. We do have contact with Richard Wilcox who's the bids, and I've been speaking to St Ives bid when we were talking about the sort of get one-way systems and so on going going on in the towns. But I would say that, again, perhaps a little bit more collaboration with them would be generally good, although there's quite a lot of them, and so a central point through Richard would be very helpful. But I think, again, going back to this economic recovery group, that seems to have covered a lot of bases. It's really helpful in that any messages that we have that we want to get through, anything that needs to be changed, is picked up and taken forward. So I think that's another good link and another good way for us to work with the bids. And I know that I could pick up the phone to Richard, for example, if there was anything I needed or any contacts we needed. But I'm not sure we don't get necessarily contacted so much by individual bids, and perhaps that might be useful.
Okay, and one final thing, Pete, briefly. I think a number of chambers are pushing the council to allow more free parking before Christmas, which I guess is something you'd ally yourself with. Is that something you're actually involved with at the moment?
Well, it's been an ongoing campaign, actually, and we would always put our name to being able to do that. And I mean, in fact, anything that makes it easier for customers to get to shops is something that we campaign for. So yes, I mean, it's an active campaign that the FSB have and would endorse. I would say that, hand on heart, we haven't gone to, I don't know, say St Ives bid or something and said, right, okay, we'll campaign actively on this. It's a general statement that we put out, and a general, sort of piece of knowledge that we would put out, that yes, that it is helpful. It makes perfect sense. Although we understand the constraints that the councils will be under, obviously, because you need to have revenue from those car parks as well. So it is a difficult thing. But also, I would say, even going further than car parks, is things like, could there be some kind of public transport incentive? Is there some way that rather than people taking their cars, could there be, rather than encouraging people to drive into the towns and villages? And I have to say, I visited Mevergissey not so long ago, and it was just brilliant and charming, and Polperro is the same. And actually, if people could get there quite easily on public transport, and maybe didn't even have to take a car and pay to park, and it was cheap and easy and free, or maybe even free for them to get there for over the Christmas time, those little shops with those really brilliant little things in there might just do better.
Okay. Come to Penzance, it's fabulous.
Absolutely, yes, also.
And Bude, of course.
Thank you. I was feeling a bit left out there. And Bude, and of course Liscard,
and everywhere.
Indeed. Thank you very much. That was really helpful.
Okay, so thank you, panel, for that. And in your introduction, you said that digital communications and the connection consistency was probably one of the prime things that you'd be pushing as a recommendation. But it'd be really nice to try to squeeze 2 or 3 other key things that you think Cornwall Council could actually do to help small businesses on its way to provide that economic vitality for the hinterlands, the coastal and rural areas in Cornwall. And is there anything that you'd like to bring forward otherwise, other than those? I know you gave us a whole raft, but could you prioritise another 2, say?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously that digital thing is really important, and I think I think there's something else perhaps that's linked to that, is actually something that the council can do, is to really help amplify the Cornwall brand, and the fact that use those local small businesses and all the marvellous things they have. I know you've got the Keep It Cornish website, which is up and running, but I think maybe more needs to be done to that, or maybe working with perhaps Made in Cornwall, that's I know comes under the wing of the Chamber of Commerce. But actually, I think now, if we get the digital connectivity right, and we can sort of broadcast our message to the world, then Cornwall isn't so far away from everywhere. But actually, people may well be interested in having our produce and so on that we could then send to them. And I think the council can help to amplify the good things that are going on in Cornwall. And the small businesses don't have a lot of money for marketing and advertising and all those sorts of campaigns. I'm sure the council don't either, but it's I think it's really important that our unitary authority, the people that look after our county actually are there, really supporting and waving the flag. And I think the Keep It Cornish website is a good start, but it may just be a bit of a sort of that is a start, and I think there could be much more done with that. And also linked to that, I hate to say it, but the word procurement, which we haven't touched on in the questions, which I thought we might, but procurement, I think, is also absolutely vital, because Cornwall Council and all of the other public bodies use a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of stuff that small businesses can provide. I think it's when we have done some work with procurement in the past with Cornwall Council, and I know they've done some great sort of procurement events and so on. When David Morgan, I think, was doing some stuff with that a few years ago. And it seemed to sort of grind to a bit of a halt. And I think it's difficult. We understand the difficulties for the council in doing that, because obviously if you've got a big contract to fulfil, a small business isn't necessarily going to be best placed to do that unless it can work collaboratively with others. And of course, that brings with it its own problems. But I think maybe there needs to be a little bit more outside of the box thinking. And again, with digital communication, people can have the ability to collaborate and work together more now. So I would say procurement would be definitely right up there, as well as something the council can actually do.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Anne. So we've got 3 key recommendations from you, and I suppose it would be unsurprising to say to hear that what the number 1 is digital communications and connectivity. The other 2 really are about a circular economy. So yeah, that probably would be no surprises to
anyone, really. Yeah, it's all really. I mean, when I was putting the presentation together, which of course I'm sorry I couldn't share the slides, I don't know why, but I'll let you have the copy of the slides as well, just to so you've got the facts and figures there in front of you. But it's, when you think about it, it is all, a lot of it is common sense. And if you put yourself, and I would say to any of you, putting yourself into the, and you probably are anyway, people who run businesses in the community, you will know yourselves exactly what it is like. And I would urge anybody who doesn't run a business to actually try and think of themselves, okay, if I was running this business in this place, what would I need? What would my problems be? And pretty much it's common sense, and it does come to you.
Yeah. Okay, so Anne, thank you very much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
It's been very insightful and good to hear from the Federation of Small Businesses, and obviously everything that you've had to say. So we're very grateful to you, and thank you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much to all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay, so to the rest of the panel, we've got Mr. Bone from Dairy Crest Direct, I think due at 3:30. We're obviously 7 minutes or 8 minutes ahead of schedule now, so I'm going to propose that we have a very quick break to nip and make a cup of tea and make ourselves comfortable and come back at 3:30. Is that okay with everyone? Yeah, okay, so microphones off, back at 3:30.
Hi, Steve. You all right?
Hi, Dave. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. The panel's just, because they just finished with one witness, they've just gone off to get a quick cup of tea and a comfort break, and then they'll be back at past.
No problem.
All right. So the series is still being recorded. So just so you know, everyone's got their microphones off at the moment, and they'll be back in a moment.
No problem. Do you want me to just mic off for a minute? And
yeah, unless you've got any questions about the session or anything that you want to cover.
No, no, I'm all
Nope.
good to go, Dave. I think
Okay.
so if I understand it correctly, if I just give a little bit of a brief, give them a little briefing on myself.
Absolutely, and I think all three hats, well, probably four hats, given the farm business, Dairy Crest Direct, Mole Valley Farms, and probably Farm Cornwall as well.
Okay, yeah, no problem. That's
But
fine.
I think it's a with your farming hat is the main reason that you've been asked to come forward as a witness. But as we discussed in the briefing, your knowledge of what the other 200 odd farmers or 300 odd farmers in Dairy Crest Direct are facing, and the however many members of Mole Valley Farmers and the business itself gives you an insight into how the economy of rural areas are facing or faring more than most.
Yeah, that's not a problem at all.
Okay,
that'll be fine. Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to switch my mic and my my camera off while I go and get a drink, and then I'll be back in a minute.
Well, when I hear action, I'll join. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay. Speak in a minute, Dave.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Right, so thanks everyone. So I think we're probably all back. Mr. Bones, I can see you in the room. Steve, welcome, and sorry to delay just for a few moments. We've been here for an hour and a half. We just needed to nip off and make a cup of tea and make ourselves good for the next session. So thank you ever so much indeed for joining us. We appreciate it. You've had the background blurb. This inquiry panel is all about looking at the economic vitality and viability of rural and coastal areas. That is everything in Cornwall that isn't necessarily the towns, but we're also trying to look at the links between towns and those rural areas just to see how they interact and work together. So the general gist of how it's going is we're asking you sort of for 10 minutes or so time slot for you to just tell us what you think about how things are going, and then we'll have a gentle chat with you one by one after you've done that, if that's okay. And then after we've done that, we'll try and extract 2 or 3 recommendations from you, which we can then consider as part of our process. So welcome to our meeting. Thank you very much for joining, as I said, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. Afternoon, everybody. Speaking to Dave, would it be helpful if I gave you a little bit of background as to what I do and where I do it? My name's Stephen Bone, obviously. I am 51. I am predominantly a dairy farmer. I milk 300 cows in the far west of Cornwall. I farm 1,100 acres, of which dairy makes up 80% of the annual income. Supporting areas of the business of beef, and we would grow quite a large amount of supporting crops that are used for home consumption. The farm also has quite an extensive higher level stewardship agreement, guys, and if you're familiar with Lanyon Point or the Men and Toll, all those areas would fall within my regime and my boundary lines, which that agreement has been live for best part of 10 years now. So we would work on an annual basis with Natural England on that. We have a small array of PV, 50 kilowatts. Outside of the farm, I am chairman of Dairy Crest Direct, DPO. DPO stands for Dairy Producer Organisation. To date, we are the only producer organisation in terms of dairy in the country. We would represent approximately 350 dairy producers who would all supply Saputo Dairy UK, which processes milk out of, and you'll be familiar with the Davidstow factory up at Davidstow. Of course, all that milk is turned into either Cathedral City or Davidstow brand. We would talk to Saputo in our capacity as representatives on monthly, if not weekly. The subjects or areas in terms of talk stroke debate stroke negotiate would be price, obviously, but also contractual stuff, ever increasing farm standards and demands that are needed to suffice in terms of the marketplace of retailers, etc. So that's what I do, and I don't know whether I said it, like I sit as chairman of that business. I also sit as a director of Mull Valley Farmers, I suspect you'll be familiar with, which is an agricultural cooperative turning over £500 million a year. It also has over 60 retail outlets on the estate, and a number of feed mills, obviously supplying feed for agricultural animals, etc. Those mills will have a spread from the southwest of Scotland down to Lifton in Devon. So I obviously experience on a farm level the pros and cons and the economic impacts of all sorts of stuff. But also would see that through the other 2 hats that I wear, would see this on a broader basis in terms of the challenges that the rural economy, stroke farmers, and those people linked with it are facing. So this stuff is very much live and very live with me a lot of the time. Challenges at the moment, guys, just to give you a little bit of a taster, really. Just reading, DCD would commission annual costings from an independent company, and of late we've seen soya, which would be a huge driver of feed pricing in the bovine feed market. That product has increased over the last quarter 39%. That has had a huge, that will add, in terms of cost of production, we could be talking around 3 to 4p cost of production, which, you know, in a dairy and beef market is a monumental increase. So that, coupled with the uncertainty of Brexit, and you know, obviously currency and is a huge in terms of, is also huge in terms of product we buy and product we sell. So all those are in play at the moment in terms of our income and our expenditure, and certainly isn't helpful at the moment in terms of stability. So sure, that's it, guys, from me, but feel free to pitch in and ask at will.
Okay, thanks, Steve. The Saputo plant at Davidstow is something where that I'm really sort of quite aware of, because I drive past it. Well, I would have driven past it every time I went to Truro, which of course I'm not doing anymore, but never mind. And I'm also aware that it's got a fairly hefty expansion, I think, on the fairly near horizon, if they haven't already started. And one of the things that's come out of this particular process that we've been involved in, and David brought to my attention, was the amount of dairy milk that's actually hoovered up by that plant throughout Cornwall, and it's a huge amount of the production of Cornwall goes there, and I think a huge amount of production outside Cornwall comes in to make the cheese. And I just wondered strategically, if Saputo one day suddenly shut their plant down, our dairy industry would be in a bit of trouble, wouldn't it?
Undoubtedly, yeah. No, you know, and this is the dilemma faced with a number of geographical areas in the country. You know, where there's a lack of process, and we're actually very lucky in Cornwall. Very lucky in Cornwall. You know, we've got a very strong cooperative in terms of Arla, which, although they wouldn't process if any milk in Cornwall, they've got a very strong infrastructure, a very strong producer base, and are paying an excellent price. You've got Saputo, obviously, who have Davidstow in play. You also have Trewithen Dairies. You also have Rodders, names and brands that we'll all recognise. So in terms of processing, we've got good capacity. But yeah, you're right, Peter. You know, should that factory be taken out of the scenario, then we've got a huge problem, because, you know, logistically that's a lot of volume of milk. That factory at the moment is processing around about 560 million litres a year, of which a lot, and I can't quite tell you at the moment the exact percentage that comes out of Cornwall, but it would be quite a chunk. And yeah, we would have a huge issue. You know, what plays in our favour is that they're producing by some way the leading British cheddar cheese brand, and you know, it's probably bigger than the next three leading brands all put together. So you know, it's a quite a compelling, hence why Saputo obviously bought it from Dairy Crest, but you know, it's quite a compelling a business, you know. Yeah, and they have increased capacity. I think Saputo have managed to, I think the word is sweat the asset even more, because of their knowledge of cheese making, or you know, production around the world, and they are producing and processing milk all over the world, has allowed them to really get some of that sort of work and time and motion, and have allowed them actually to increase nearly to where they wanted to be prior to any infrastructural change. So that infrastructural change, which I believe has started, will help to increase and hopefully buy even more milk within the vicinity. So yeah, it's a good factory to have kicking around.
Yeah, I suppose, like everything, all of these things don't come without their issues. It's absolutely fantastic that we've got a company that's forward looking and doing really well, but it doesn't come without its not problems, but issues that do need to be thought about, don't they? So David has put in the chat box that actually that they take broadly 50% of all milk produced in Cornwall goes to Saputo, which is a rather interesting figure, isn't it? David, you've put an X in your box. I'll give you a chance to speak before I go to the panel.
Thank you, Chair. David Rodder, Economic Growth Manager. It's always been broadly around 50%. It switches sometimes with the other companies that Steve mentioned, or Arla are the next biggest one. I think the brand value, though, of the David Stowe brand is a key thing to consider. The last time I was speaking to Arla, to Saputo, I think they're quite pleased that they're now the brand value is up in the same realms as Nike and Coca-Cola and those sorts of things. So it is a really strong brand that's in Cornwall, and as it goes forward, it's becoming more and more Cornish, because years ago it was David Stowe and nobody knew that it was made in Cornwall, whereas now they are pushing the Cornishness of it a lot more, I believe, than they ever did.
Yeah. No, that's good. Perhaps they need to put a picture on the front of the cheese of the Formula One racing track. But yes, so we'll go first to Jim McKenna, please.
Pete, thank you. Steve, hi. Jim McKenna, Cornwall Councillor for Penzance. I also have the pleasure of chairing the Landscape Partnership Board, the Penwith Landscape Partnership Board, which you may have come across.
Yes.
Just a couple of questions from me. In terms of the support the council offers to the sector, we have the Farm Business Advice Centre, which is basically Edward Richardson, who presumably you've come across.
I'll fess up now. I'm a trustee of that business, Jim. So yeah, I definitely have come across him. Yes.
Brilliant. Okay. So at the moment there is him, and he covers from here to Bude.
Yep.
What, given the changes facing the sector, what if the council were to consider employing one or two more people to actually add a bit of weight and support Edward with that? Would that be of use to the organisation you represent, the 300 and some farmers?
Yeah, undoubtedly. Really, I think having another hat, that also a hat I wear, but having seen the work that some of that has done, Jim, in the past, and certainly work that they've done with the countryside, Prince's Countryside Fund, where they've done a lot of benchmarking. It's still, we farmers work, in the main pretty hard, and sometimes, we lose sight of the business performance, and businesses like Farm Cornwall and the likes of. That's where I believe a lot of good can come. Focusing, making sure we as farmers are not busy fools. We understand the financial rationale, and there's a lot of guys out there that farm very well and look after the livestock crops very well, but perhaps struggles somewhat with the financials.
Okay. Thank you. And second question, Pete, is around the ELM, the new proposals. How will that affect the sector generally? And is there anything the local authority could do to support that?
And so you're talking about ELMs,
yes,
Jim?
Environmental land.
It could have quite a major impact. It's certainly in the west of Cornwall. We're all sitting patiently, or perhaps not so patiently, waiting to see actually what that looks like. Current agreements are running on to cover that gap, as I understand it. And but as support payments are reduced, it'll cause concern for a lot of people, not least the guys that perhaps I sell my milk to, and every dairy farmer, because at the moment those guys to some degree and on some farms, that support payment will be the profitability of that farm.
Yes,
no doubt about it. So that profitability has to come from somewhere else, and it might have to come, dare I say, from the product they're selling. So you could find there's a lot of businesses out there that suddenly on paper have produced a profit that in the not too distant future might be struggling, and that's where farm business support in terms of business performance and productivity are going to be hugely important. Hugely
Okay.
important.
One final thing, apologies, Pete, just in relation to farm gate prices, there have been a number of individual things, so Cornish Early, for example, locally, which have been tried to try and raise the sort of what the farmers get at the point of contact, or point of sale. What one thing would you suggest that could be done so that Cornwall can do this better? So that people can work collaboratively rather than sort of individual potato growers or whatever it may be, doing something relatively small and it disappearing after a few years. What could we do collectively to actually make this something that's a priority?
Tough one, Jim, really, because we find ourselves falling into these categories. These guys that are, as you said, that have been perhaps smaller producers in whatever, but mainly probably in the veg sector. We're seeing large operators now growing, thousands of acres of crop, probably low margin but high output, and that's probably the model we're seeing in a lot of livestock production. It seems to be falling into the category of perhaps volume, low margin, or actually more nichier stuff where people are, perhaps adding good value and making good money, but not at a large scale.
Right.
So that's always a challenge. There's when you have that sort of product, it's how you grow that, and there's difficulty.
Okay.
It can be done. Not sure if
you.
that's a good question there, really, but
no, it's good. It's useful context because it's a recurring frustration. Really, you see Cornish stuff in the supermarkets. If you go to a supermarket, which I try not to, but it's been a country and back. It's been chilled and it's been probably 400, 500 food miles, when actually you could get it for 5 or 10 food miles. And I just wonder how we crack that if we can. But David Rodder's giving 14.3 million quid away in the chat box there through the LEP, so maybe that's part of the solution.
Yeah, and perhaps it is. It'll certainly be money much needed.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it just always does seem a shame that we can't get cheap electricity straight from our wind turbines, that we can't get really quick, good quality, cheap internet from all the internet cables that fall ashore here in Cornwall, and like nice direct access to really good quality cheese at 10% less than the rest of the marketplace. But hey, never mind. We understand that bit. We understand that bit. So, Councillor Jane Pascoe, can I invite you to have a chat with Steve?
Well, yes, certainly you can. Thank you. Hello, Steve. That was really interesting, actually. I've sort of got some random questions I really would like to ask that don't all sort of marry up particularly, but some are relevant to the inquiry. And the first, actually, one with the inquiry, the support payments. The towns rely on a lot of the activity that goes on in the rural hinterland. So the food and farming is very important to the town centres, which, as you will know, are struggling. And I'm just wondering what the impact, if those support payments aren't there, and we're going to be showing that maybe the farmers aren't making the profits, so aren't able to spend the money, that's going to actually have quite an impact on the town centre before anybody's really cottoned on to it, basically. The other thing I wanted to ask you is are you happy, and the Trade and Agricultural Commission is going to help with the food standards and protecting some of the farming practices for the Cornwall farmers? And that was the other question I wanted to ask at the moment.
So if I deal with the second one first, no, not confident. Although they say, having already met Liz Truss at Davidstow not that long ago, and expressed concern about potential imported product, and what that might look like in terms of its production standards as opposed to ours, which are, as you, I no doubt you're all aware of, are pretty high and increasingly so. And we never take a backward step; it's always forward. So. But all this comes at a cost. So, so I'm not confident in that. I'm yet to be convinced. And given that there's no sort of policy in place that dictates that has to be the case, it's only word of mouth. No, is the short answer. In terms of I suppose, town centre and what that, the financial impact, if I suppose, Jane, no different to any other business. I rarely, if I had to be honest with you, go to Penzance these days, but having needed to go to the post office not that long ago, probably 2 weeks ago, walking through Penzance, and walk through the wharf side, shop after shop closed. As people's ability to spend deteriorates, more shops close, the draw and to go into the town become less and less. So it's a sort of ever decreasing circle, really, isn't it? As people get less, it's less of an opportunity for businesses in the centre. So it certainly won't. I don't know is the short answer, but it certainly won't help.
Thank you.
Okay, Jane, thanks for those. Mike McClenning, would you like to have a chat with Steve?
Good afternoon, Steve. I'm Mike McClenning. I'm from look after St Stephen and Brannel division, which is the clay country. I'm a bit of a townie because I've only moved down here 13 years ago. So farms where I went when I was a kid on my holidays in Bude, actually, quite a few times. A question that my colleague Jim mentioned about the chap, I've forgotten his name, who we spoke to the other day from the Farm Association.
Yeah, Edward Richardson.
He was talking about jobs and the difficulty. If I put you on the spot, were you involved with your family, or did you just become a farmer, or was it before you took over the reins?
No, I'd be. I think now I'm on 4th generation. I am, and all my predecessors are tenant farmers. I would rent all my land from Edward Blythe, who you're probably all aware is the Lord Lieutenant of Cornwall.
Yeah.
So no, I am not a new starter, but since I became a partner and stroke probably I am now effectively in charge, although I've got a number of partners. I would have increased the farm turnover about 3 times.
Okay.
That doesn't necessarily mean I increase profit 3 times, but the turnover's gone. Sorry.
He mentioned about the difference between getting people to come in and work in whatever roles. I mean, I did tap him on the knuckles because he said ordinary jobs, but to me he was being kind, actually. Jobs he was saying paying 25, 26, 27,000 for people look after, I don't know, of course, cow herdsmen or still whatever. We end up by saying if we can't get the people locally, then you've got to draw them from that part of the country, other parts of the country. Is that your experience the same on that, or do you find you can get staff locally?
No, it's getting staff, and it is increasingly getting more and more difficult. As livestock producers, you'll appreciate that it is not quite 24, but definitely 7 days a week.
Yeah.
Animals need to be milked and animals need to be fed and looked after. Just to give you a taster, probably in terms of my business, I employed 4 people to do that job. I'm now employing 6, just because of, I suppose it's a work-life balance, really, Mike. People want more time off, and it does put their commitments, their ability. It certainly isn't. I struggle to get that sort of quality of staff. Most of the guys, I haven't got any foreign labour. It's all not necessarily local. I think the last guy I got came down from Bude, but it is really, there's not much keeps me awake at night. I get up most mornings at 4:30. But labour, we've just calved 240 cows in 6 weeks, and labour gives me cause for concern, and how we address that, I'm not sure. That we're increasingly paying more to try and attract that calibre, but again, you know, people are happy to get paid less, but do less effectively.
Yeah. My colleague Jim, again this afternoon, is to most of the witnesses has been on about how Cornwall Council can help. I mean, looking for employment, I post up on my own Facebook page, people looking for jobs. But again, is that something that could be improved with the council at all anywhere? I don't know the answer to that. Or have you got your own sort of link looking for people, employment, or is that, have you got an organisation within your groups that do that, or is it just putting in my area, you sometimes see them on the Griggs garden farm shop, you know, staff wanted for the season or you know, whatever. So I don't know how you can improve on that. That's probably not an answer really, is it, to it, Vicious?
All of the above. Social media, you know, seems to be where a lot of adverts are placed. These days, number of sites, you know, a number of internet sites in terms of, you know, employment. There seems to be, when you post each job, there's a lot of people that are looking, there's a lot of people that are applying, but it's not the most glamorous of jobs. You know, in the last 6 weeks, I think I've lost a stone in weight. I'm just wondering if I'm missing a trick and should be offering this as some sort of weight loss, and actually charging people for 6 weeks to come and work on the farm. But yeah,
I need that actually. But my last question, Brexit, which you mentioned, what happens if there's no deal?
Good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that, but it would be hugely. I suppose it's the unknown, didn't it?
Yeah.
Because I'm happy for if anybody knows the answer. I'd like to be enlightened, because we are really walking in the dark at that point, you know. And it's what all the products I import in terms of, you know, machinery, replacements, you know, equipment, what the price of that will look like, what the price of my product will look like, you know. It's yeah, it's a huge unknown, like, and you know, and that just isn't helping the agricultural sector.
So do you have to import because it's better produced abroad, or the price, or because of both? Is it? Are we too expensive in our own country?
The problem is, in the main, it's only produced abroad. You know, a lot of the agricultural equipment we would buy, very little of it is manufactured now in the UK. It's all Europe. Right. So we are a bit of a done deal there, I'm afraid. It's not choice.
Right. Okay. Thanks for the answers. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Intriguing, isn't it? Some of them, a lot of the manufacturing and specialist machinery. I think you're about definitely the second, if not the third person to say that they can only buy the engineering materials from European suppliers because that's where it's made. It was the wind turbines. That was the other one that I was thinking of, wasn't it? Steve, you mentioned that soya as a raw material had gone up 39%. I think you said.
Yeah.
I'm just intrigued. Just for me, would you expand on that a bit? Is soya your main foodstuff or feedstuff for your cattle?
No, it isn't. But soya tends to drive everything else, Pete. So, you know, everything in terms of grain prices, all the byproducts that you know, citrus pulp, sugar beet, all of that. Yeah, soya will effectively drive all of those commodity products, and they are, you know, they make up a large degree of the diet that we would feed bovine animals. So, you know, although it, to a lesser great extent, is used on farm, it drives everything else. So there lies part of the problem. And, you know, I suppose we're all looking for a replacement, an economical and effective, actually, replacement, given all that's going on in terms of environment. But, you know, there's still, you know, we're still relying on it to quite some degree.
Right. I'm just thinking, if your inputs go up by 40%, there is no way that you're not going to put 40% increase on. Well, I don't know. I don't know how it works. Presumably you're in contract with Saputo to supply your product at a fixed price for a certain time. I guess that's how it works. But if your inputs go up by 40% overnight, you'd be in trouble, wouldn't you?
Well, we would discuss milk price on a monthly basis. but ultimately, as most farmers are, we are effectively price takers. And so, it's at Saputo's discretion, and they will not like that word discretionary, but, although we have effectively, if I just quickly describe the process, we would talk to Saputo on a monthly basis. If we agreed, then we agree a milk price. If we don't agree with either of them dropping the price or not increasing the price or even leaving the price where it is, we can effectively disagree, and that is the technical name, which gives our members the ability to leave Saputo within 3 months, whereas it is an annual contract. So there is a get out more quickly clause on disagreement, and that's our sort of that's the negotiation tool that we use. But when they're paying a reasonable price in the marketplace compared with some, and also nobody else is recruiting milk producers, it isn't a chip in the game you'd like it to be. So no. So the answer is, no. Just because my cost increases by 40% or my feed cost increased by 40% doesn't mean that Saputo will recognise that, or any other milk producer.
Yeah, the worry, isn't it? It's such a huge risk that you're all taking. Okay, so I can see David Rodder some time ago indicated he'd like to say a word.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to add value to, or add some other information around that cost issue. So talking to the vegetable growers in Cornwall recently, their labour costs have gone up 36% in the last 4 or 5 years. Their price has gone up by 0%. And they've had other costs go up as well, fuel costs and everything else. And their supermarket customers are saying they want a price reduction this year. So it's just the nature of the business that we're in, unfortunately.
Ditto, Dave. Ditto.
Yeah.
And having talked to Saputo, that'd be very much the line they're taking. Brexit is a huge concern for them, but also large retailers looking at potential recession after COVID-19 are saying price reductions will reign.
Yeah, margin squeeze is, if you talk to any food processor, it's margin squeeze, and that is why you've now got smaller Mars bars, or smaller, I should probably say, given that it's recorded, smaller chocolate bars, smaller pack sizes of biscuits. I'm eating too many of those. So that is what's happening. People are either reducing the size, potentially reducing the quality. I think I use that term advisedly. But they're potentially moving to cheaper ingredients in order to keep up. The point of putting my X in the box was, Steve, I wonder whether you've given some useful farm experience, direct farm experience, and also dealing with your Dairy Crest Direct. Mole Valley farmers, big business, works nationwide. What's the general feeling about, as a trading business in a rural area that trades with an awful lot of other rural businesses and people that live in rural areas? Have you got any insights into how that business is seeing things that might be useful to the panel?
Yeah, certainly. It's always obviously looking at, I get to see the full story in terms of that business, and there will be no shock and probably no secret to anybody that it will be predominantly where there is a financial squeeze coming on. It is the livestock producers, where, and without going into huge detail, because to be fair, I can't. But I suspect you'll all get the gist of what I mean by that, in terms of debt repayment, etc. So it's no doubt that that's where that is on a monthly basis we would see issues. It's the old saying, farmer has a cough and sort of all those people supply and catch a cold, and that's very much the way it is actually. So always a challenge. It's in itself the ethos of a cooperative is a very low margins, and normal businesses wouldn't operate to the targets we do, but it's very much member orientated and trying to deliver value to the members, of that business. So yeah.
But as a useful aside, and in terms of, because Mole Valley is a local business, it has outlets in Cornwall. It's headquartered, I think, in Devon, isn't it? South Molton.
South Molton, yeah.
So in case you can become a member as a fully fledged farmer member. You can be a I'm not advertising for Mole Valley here, but just giving members an example. They also have a fuel buying group.
Yep.
I recently joined that just as a personal thing to buy oil for our central heating at home, and it saves 5-6p a litre. Which, for when you think about the level of fuel poverty we've got in Cornwall and the reliance on oil heating and those sorts of things, there are these group buying things that we can use. There are other people out there that do this type of thing, but if greater awareness of that type of activity, that group buying, could be really beneficial in rural areas.
Well, that example alone, we just through volume that we're able to deal with, we've cut out a supplier, if you like, and now talking to refineries direct. So you're able then to add some value in terms of you just highlighted where the value is, Dave, and I guess that's what that business is all about, really. I think the strap line is to stop people profiteering at the expense of farmers is effectively our strap line, really.
Yeah, my opinion is, Stephen, and this is, I'm not a farmer. I don't come from a farming background, but look from the outside looking in, I think the farmers need to somehow take control of a bit more power in the relationship and the supply chain. How you do that, I don't know, but it feels a bit like over the last 20 years or so, you've been disempowered by some sharp buying practices of the big businesses. But there we are. Final word before I sum up goes to Linda Taylor.
Thank you, LeBoy, for letting me come back in. I hope, Steve, I hope you don't mind me asking this question, but obviously Cornwall Council's got its own farm strategy and it's got its own management of its own farms. Have you got any observations of how something could be more effective there, or how that strategy could be worked to complement what's actually happening with the rest of the farming world within Cornwall?
Having lost a very good employee to a county council farm not that long ago, and it was great for him, and he fully deserved it. It's a fantastic stepping stone for somebody to go from zero effectively onto the farming ladder, and I struggle to see how anybody, how else someone could do that. I guess perhaps the problem goes then, guys, as farming businesses, take my own. I'm a tenant, farming. I know, farming 1,100 acres. I suppose the challenge for all those guys that you guys allow and bring onto the ladder quite successfully, then make that next step. And and going from my ex-employees, he's milking 66 cows. At the end of his tenancy, when perhaps you guys need him to move on and somebody else to come in on the bottom tier of the ladder, how on earth does he make that next step? How does he get in on that farm and effectively have to increase numbers? So I suppose that bottom step of the ladder, Linda, needs to increase as well. That perhaps that 60 cow farm needs now to be a 120 cow farm. I completely get there's challenges around that, because that's more money, more working capital needed to get there. But the shame comes when those guys who've developed the business and have gained that experience can't then make that next step on, just because of the huge gap between where they've been and where they need to be, I guess would be my observation. And it's not a critical observation at all. I completely get what you do, and I admire it. But it's getting those guys really on the ladder, and there's plenty of people out there that want to do it, by hook or by crook, and work hard at it. but it'd be a shame for them to get on the ladder and get a couple of steps up it and then have to jump off again. So there's going to be a challenge, I think, and something for you guys all to have to think about and contemplate how you resource that and what you do with those farms perhaps in the future.
Thank you, Steve, because that's a really good insight for me, and that's really useful information. Thank you.
Yeah,
that's all right. You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions, Linda. David, perhaps you'd like to sum up for me.
Yeah, I was just going to respond, Councillor Taylor. Last year, the County Farms Estate reviewed its strategy. I think it reflected on the fact that it probably had the pyramid the wrong way up. It had a lot of starter units and very few progression units, I think, to use the term. I think the last time we actually purchased a farm was probably 15 or 20 years ago, kind of 120. So there'd been lots of disposals of buildings and bits of land here or there, but they hadn't purchased any new land for quite some period of time, which we did a few years ago. We bought a dairy unit, 120 cow unit, I think it is. Steve, you probably know the one I'm talking about. And I think the strategy now is looking across the estate, looking not necessarily to reduce the land holding as such in terms of total, but possibly turn the pyramid the other way up to have fewer starter units and more progression units to absolutely deal with what Stephen's just identified as how do you go from 60 to 120 to the step up of 300, which is commonplace out in the private rental market probably. I know one estate in Cornwall, remain nameless, they haven't rented any land off the estate, so every time a tenant farmer retires, they take the house back and rent that out separately and divide the land up to the existing tenants. So 30-40 years ago that estate probably had 40 tenants. It's now got 10, and that is a way of that estate maximizing its income and its return from its capital. But the space has opened up between what the council's able to provide and what the private sector is providing, and I think that as Steve said, that's the gap that I believe the County Farm strategy is in the process of trying to fill. It'll take time because there's a lot of investment to be made and in the infrastructure on some of the farms. Hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so everyone, thank you very much indeed for your questions. And Steve, if you're still there, we're asking all of our witnesses if they would care to make sort of a couple of strategic recommendations to the panel as things we might want to consider that Cornwall Council could bring in as interventions, things that we can do to help industry in the rural environment. Would you have any in mind that you'd like to bring forward?
What I'd like to say is I think, with a Farm Cornwall out, and I've seen some of the good that business has done, and perhaps that should be an area of consideration, not necessarily Farm Cornwall, but in terms of that, getting that. I'm just trying to think of the words now, Peter, but getting that expertise and bringing people along on the journey, improving technical and productivity is going to be massively important. And there's no way anybody's got the money to do it on an individual basis to farmers, and that support seems to be drying up. Is strategically making investment in that sort of business and that sort of expertise as it is going to be vital to not all farmers, but quite a number. There's still a lot of us average Joes out there who need that assistance and will be looking for it. So that perhaps would be one. And we touched on labour. I don't know if Cornwall County Council could come up with the solution, guys, in terms of that. But that is a real predicament for all farmers, whether it's my my vegetable colleagues, but it's going to be a huge issue. And, you know, quite honestly, I can't function as we grow our businesses. I can't function without outside labour, and you know, and skilled labour, and here's a word, reliable labour. And to be fair, at the moment, the last word is the one that, you know, that is most important. It's getting that reliability in place and encouraging people. And I did hear that 1 in 4 people could be out of a job in a not too distant future in Cornwall because of the whole scenario we're facing. You know, how do you get those? Yeah, there's a lot of people out there working in Cornwall that aren't Cornish. Yeah, how do we get those people? How do we get those people? Make them conscientious enough, reliable enough to fulfil those posts, because that is the challenge. So
very different. I'm sure, Steve, you probably, I think one of the points that Edward made to us was you probably get a lot of applicants of people who thinking they might be driving a nice air-conditioned tractor around a field for a few hours a day. It would be lovely, but actually farming isn't really like that, so I'm told.
No, sometimes I wish I was driving an air-conditioned tractor around the field, but quite often you're up to your knees in it, and you know, all times of the day and night. So it's not quite as romantic as perhaps we'd all like to think. And but that's the nature of the job, and it's all about cycles. And you know, my business, this is a tough time of year, tough cycle. There's some really good stuff, but it's about, you know, getting your head down when you're in the tough bit and enjoying it perhaps when you're not. And I think, you know, quite often people come in a hard bit, and that's the end of them, really. So, you know, it is a monumental challenge. I hope I'm wrong in this, but I can't see the end of it at the moment.
Yeah. Okay, now I did say that it was Linda Taylor having the last word, but Mike McLenning has indicated he'd like to add to the conversation. So Mike, if you'd come forward.
Yeah, it won't be too long. I hope I pronounced it right. It's Saputo. Yeah. Do they sell the milk for you? Yeah.
So you know, they would process all that milk. It all goes into cheddar cheese, or either, you know, one of 2 brands. It's then shipped up to Nuneaton in a huge storage area, and it is massive. Where they could have up to, on, I believe the figure is something in the region of £50 million worth of cheese sitting on a pallet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So who's responsible? Are the supermarkets, from my experience, I used to have to buy space for products in supermarkets. So are you or Saputo, are they the ones paying for display allowances? Because that's a huge cost as well to put your product.
I wouldn't be privy, if I had to be honest with you, Mike, with that degree of detail, but I suspect, you know, all these businesses are about growing volume, and that's what I hear when I'm talking about milk prices. Hey, we need to grow volume. And generally, when you're dealing with retailers, growing volume means that you have to come to a bit of a deal, and you know you'll know where that goes.
Yeah.
So, you know, actually, COVID-19 has seen a huge increase in cheddar cheese sales, because when people were on lockdown, they sort of gave up all the stuff that you obviously have at a restaurant in terms of your Stiltons and your more high end cheeses, and we're going out buying large blocks of yellow cheddar. Which, but you know, that business saw 200 at some points was seeing a huge increase in sales. Did the milk price move on the back of that? No. There you go. So that's the disconnect we're facing into, really.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, so Steve, thank you very much indeed. It's been really interesting and valuable to us to hear from you. So thank you from me, and thank you from the panel. Thanks for your time. We know your time is valuable, and you can be rest assured that we'll take everything that you've said and cogitate it and put it through our machine, and really sort of try and take it on board and try and act on whatever of it we possibly can. So my gratitude to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everybody. Wish you a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, so Lynn, do we need to now close down just to the panel?
Yes, sorry, I'm just about to turn the recording off. So we've come to the end of the meeting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.